The sound echoed through the hospital corridor like a gunshot. Zara's head snapped to the side, her hand instinctively reaching for her swollen belly as the sting spread across her cheek. The nurses froze. Dr. Johnson's clipboard clattered to the floor. Even the beeping machine seemed to pause in shock. Nathan's hand was still raised, his face twisted with rage. His expensive suit was wrinkled, his usually perfect hair disheveled from running his fingers through it. The phone in his other hand was still glowing with Candace's name on the screen, the call that had triggered this nightmare. "You embarrassed me," Nathan hissed, his voice low but deadly. "Calling me away from an important meeting for this drama." Zara touched her burning cheek, her dark eyes filling with tears that had nothing to do with physical pain. She was 8 months pregnant, had been bleeding, and the doctor said she needed emergency monitoring. But Nathan was angry because his secretary had called while he was being briefed on his wife's condition. "Sir, I need to ask you to leave," Dr. Johnson said firmly, stepping between them. His voice shook slightly, but his stance was protective. "This is completely unacceptable behavior in my hospital." Nathan straightened his tie, his businessman mask sliding back into place. But his eyes remained cold as he looked at Zara. "Fix this mess," he said quietly. "I have real work to do." He walked away without another word, leaving Zara alone with the medical staff who had witnessed her humiliation. The silence that followed was deafening. A nurse gently helped her back onto the examination table, her movements careful and kind. "Mrs. Richardson," Dr. Johnson said softly, "your baby is fine. The bleeding has stopped. But I need to keep you overnight for observation." Zara nodded, unable to speak. Her hand rested on her belly, feeling the gentle kicks of her daughter, a daughter who would never see her father treat her mother with such cruelty again. Something had shifted in that moment, something that could never be undone. As the nurses bustled around her, preparing her room, Zara stared out the window at the city lights. Nathan's company headquarters dominated the skyline, its logo glowing against the night sky. For 5 years she had stood by his side as he built his empire. She had supported him, loved him, believed in him even when others called him ruthless. Now she saw the truth. She wasn't his wife, she was just another possession. And like all of Nathan's possessions, she could be discarded the moment she became inconvenient. But Nathan had made one critical mistake. He had forgotten who her father was. Robert Sterling wasn't just any CEO. He was the man who had taught Zara that respect was earned, not given. That strength came from standing up for what was right. And that sometimes, the only way to stop a bully was to hit back harder than they had hit you. Zara pulled out her phone with trembling fingers. It was time to make a call that would change everything. "Dad?" she whispered when he answered. "I need your help." The concern in Robert's voice was immediate. "Zara? What's wrong? You sound upset." She looked down at her belly, then at the red mark on her cheek that was already starting to fade. But the memory would never fade. The humiliation, the fear, the realization that this wasn't the first time, it was just the first time it had happened in public. "Nathan hit me," she said simply. "At the hospital. In front of everyone." The silence on the other end was more terrifying than any shout could have been. When Robert finally spoke, his voice was calm, controlled, deadly. "I'm on my way." As Zara hung up, she felt something she hadn't experienced in months: hope. Nathan thought he held all the power in their marriage. He thought she was trapped, dependent, helpless. He thought he could do whatever he wanted without consequences. He was about to learn how wrong he was. Outside her window, Nathan's company logo continued to glow, unaware that its days were numbered. Zara closed her eyes and felt her daughter kick again, stronger this time. As if she too was ready for the fight that was coming. The war was about to begin, and Nathan had no idea what was headed his way. 3 days later, Zara sat in her elegant living room, surrounded by evidence of Nathan's betrayal. Her laptop was open to bank statements she had never seen before. Her phone contained screenshots of text messages between Nathan and Candace that made her stomach turn. Financial documents were spread across the coffee table like pieces of a puzzle that revealed a picture she had never wanted to see. The house felt different now. Every expensive piece of furniture, every carefully chosen decoration suddenly felt like prison bars. Nathan had insisted they live in his penthouse after they married, claiming it was more convenient for his business. Now she understood it was easier to control her when she was surrounded by his things, in his territory. Her laptop chimed with another email from the private investigator her father had recommended. James Morton was discreet, professional, and unfortunately very good at his job. The photos he had sent made her hands shake. Nathan and Candace at expensive restaurants, holding hands at the theater, kissing in the parking garage of his office building. But it was the financial information that truly shocked her. Nathan had been systematically moving money out of their joint accounts and into offshore holdings. He had taken out loans against her trust fund without her knowledge. Most damaging of all, he had already filed preliminary divorce papers with a lawyer, claiming she was mentally unstable and unfit to raise their child. Zara's phone buzzed. Another text from Candace to Nathan, sent just an hour ago. When are you going to tell her? I'm tired of sneaking around. The baby will be here soon and I want us to be together openly. Nathan's response made Zara's blood run cold. Soon. I'm finalizing the arrangements to have her committed after the birth. Postpartum depression is so common, and with her family history of mental illness, it should be easy to prove. Don't worry, baby. Everything we've worked for is almost ours. Zara stared at the message, reading it 3 times before the full meaning sank in. Nathan wasn't just planning to divorce her, he was planning to have her declared mentally incompetent so he could take everything, including their daughter. She thought about her mother, who had struggled with depression after Zara's brother Thomas was born. It had been a difficult time, but her mother had recovered with proper treatment and support. Nathan was going to twist that family history into a weapon against her. The front door opened and Nathan's voice echoed through the penthouse. Zara? I'm home. She quickly closed the laptop and shuffled the papers into a neat stack, slipping them into her purse. By the time Nathan appeared in the doorway, she was sitting calmly on the couch, her hands folded over her belly. How was your day? She asked, her voice steady despite the rage burning in her chest. Nathan loosened his tie, his expression carefully neutral. Long, important meetings. He glanced at her, and for a moment she saw something flicker in his eyes, guilt, maybe, or fear. How are you feeling? Any more bleeding? The doctor says everything is fine, Zara replied. The baby is healthy. Good. Nathan moved to the bar cart, pouring himself a glass of whiskey. I've been thinking about what happened at the hospital. I was under a lot of stress and I reacted badly. It won't happen again. It wasn't an apology, it was a dismissal. Nathan was telling her to forget it, move on, pretend it never happened. Just like she had pretended not to notice him coming home late, pretended not to smell unfamiliar perfume on his clothes, pretended not to see the way he smiled at his phone when he thought she wasn't looking. I understand, she said quietly. Nathan relaxed slightly, thinking he had successfully managed the situation. I have to go out of town next week. A conference in Chicago. You'll be fine here, won't you? Zara nodded, already knowing from the investigator's report that there was no conference. Nathan and Candace had booked a suite at the Four Seasons. They were planning a romantic getaway while his pregnant wife stayed home alone. Of course, she said. I'll probably spend some time with my father. He's been worried about me since the hospital incident. Nathan's hand tightened on his glass. There's no need to involve your father in our personal business. He's going to be a grandfather soon, Zara said carefully. It's natural that he'd be concerned. Just keep things simple, Nathan said. No need to worry him with details. After Nathan went to his office to make phone calls, Zara pulled out her secure phone, a device her father had insisted she get years ago for emergencies. She scrolled through her contacts until she found the name she was looking for. Tina? It's Zara. I need to see you. Tonight if possible. Tina Rodriguez had been her roommate in college and was now one of the most successful family law attorneys in the city. More importantly, she was someone Zara trusted completely. Of course, Tina said immediately. My office or somewhere else? Somewhere else. This needs to be private. They arranged to meet at a small cafe across town, far from Nathan's usual haunts. As Zara prepared to leave, she looked around the penthouse one more time. Everything was beautiful, expensive, perfect, and none of it mattered. What mattered was the evidence in her purse and the plan forming in her mind. Nathan thought he was so clever, so careful. He thought he had covered all his bases, anticipated every move. But he had forgotten one crucial detail. Zara Sterling Richardson was not some helpless victim. She was Robert Sterling's daughter, and she had inherited more than just his business sense. She had inherited his ability to wage war. The small cafe was nearly empty when Zara arrived, her baseball cap pulled low and sunglasses hiding her face despite the evening hour. She spotted Tina immediately. Her friend's distinctive red hair was visible even from across the room. Tina stood up as Zara approached, her expression shifting from concern to alarm as she took in her friend's appearance. My God, Zara, you look exhausted, Tina said, pulling her into a gentle hug. Are you okay? Is the baby okay? They settled into a corner booth, away from the few other customers. Zara pulled out her secure phone and showed Tina the screenshots she had gathered. As her friend read through the messages, her expression grew progressively darker. "This is conspiracy," Tina said finally. "Fraud, emotional abuse and attempted theft. How long has this been going on?" "I don't know," Zara admitted. "Maybe months. Maybe longer. I was so focused on the pregnancy, on trying to be the perfect wife, that I missed all the signs." Tina's phone buzzed and she glanced at it. "That's my assistant. I told her to clear my schedule for the next few hours. We're going to need time to go through all of this properly." They spent the next 2 hours documenting everything Zara had discovered. Tina took notes on her tablet, asking sharp questions that helped Zara see patterns she had missed. The financial manipulation was extensive and sophisticated. Nathan had been planning this for at least 6 months, possibly longer. "We need to involve your father," Tina said finally. "This isn't just about divorce proceedings anymore. Nathan's company has been facilitating these financial crimes. If we can prove that, we can go after him on multiple fronts." Zara nodded. She had been thinking the same thing. "I'm scared, Tina. What if he really tries to have me committed? What if he takes my daughter?" "That's not going to happen," Tina said firmly. "Not on my watch. But we need to move carefully. Nathan clearly has resources and connections. We need to make sure we're prepared for whatever he throws at us." They arranged to meet again the following evening, this time with Robert Sterling in attendance. As they parted ways, Tina gripped Zara's hand tightly. "You're not alone in this," she said. "Remember that." The next day, Zara went through the motions of her normal routine while Nathan was at the office. She attended her prenatal appointment, had lunch with a friend from her book club, and picked up dry cleaning. But her mind was elsewhere, planning and strategizing. That evening she drove to her father's office building. Robert Sterling Industries occupied 15 floors of a gleaming tower in the financial district. Zara had spent countless hours here as a child, playing in the conference rooms while her father worked late. Now she was returning as an adult in crisis. Robert's personal elevator whisked her directly to his executive floor. His assistant, Michelle, was waiting with a concerned smile. "Your father is in the small conference room," Michelle said. "Can I get you anything?" "Water?" "Water would be great, thank you." The conference room overlooked the city, its floor-to-ceiling windows offering a spectacular view. Robert was standing at those windows when Zara entered, his tall frame silhouetted against the evening sky. He turned as she approached, and she saw the controlled anger in his eyes that she remembered from her childhood, the look he got when someone had tried to take advantage of his family. "How are you feeling, sweetheart?" he asked, embracing her carefully. "Better now that I'm here," she said honestly. They were soon joined by Thomas, Zara's older brother, who worked as a corporate attorney for a prestigious firm. At 35, Thomas shared their father's sharp intelligence and strategic thinking. He had never liked Nathan, and his "I told you so" expression was barely contained. Tina arrived shortly after, carrying a briefcase full of documents. The four of them settled around the conference table as Tina laid out the evidence they had gathered. Robert's expression grew grimmer with each revelation. "This level of financial manipulation requires inside knowledge," Thomas observed. Nathan had help probably from someone in his finance department or his banking connections. "We need to identify his co-conspirators," Robert agreed. "And we need to understand the full scope of his business operations. If he's been stealing from Zara, he's probably been stealing from his company and his investors too." "What about the personal side?" Zara asked. "The affair, the abuse? That gives us leverage in the divorce proceedings," Tina explained. "But the financial crimes are what will really destroy him. If we can prove he's been defrauding investors and manipulating company funds, his business empire will collapse." Robert leaned back in his chair, his mind clearly working through possibilities. Nathan's company has several major contracts with government agencies. If he's been engaging in financial fraud, those contracts will be terminated immediately. That alone would cripple his business. "How long do we have?" Zara asked. "According to the investigator's timeline, Nathan plans to file for divorce and have you committed within 2 weeks of the baby's birth," Tina said. "That gives us maybe 6 weeks to prepare our counterattack." "Then we'd better get started," Robert said, standing up. His executive presence filled the room, and for the first time since the hospital incident, Zara felt truly safe. Nathan picked the wrong family to mess with. As the meeting continued, they divided responsibilities. Thomas would handle the corporate investigation, using his legal connections to dig into Nathan's business practices. Tina would prepare the divorce strategy and work on protecting Zara's rights as a mother. Robert would begin applying pressure through his business networks, subtly turning Nathan's partners and clients against him. "What about me?" Zara asked. "What's my role in all this?" "You're going to be the perfect wife," Robert said with a slight smile. "Keep Nathan thinking he's in control while we build our case. Can you do that?" Zara thought about the slap, about the text messages, about Nathan's plan to steal her daughter and have her committed. She thought about Candace's smug confidence that she would soon have everything that belonged to Zara. "Yes," she said quietly. "I can do that." But inside, she was already imagining the look on Nathan's face when he realized he had been outplayed. The Richardson name might open doors in business circles, but the Sterling name could close them just as quickly. Nathan was about to learn that lesson the hard way. 2 weeks into their investigation, the scope of Nathan's crimes was becoming clear. Zara sat in Thomas's law office, reviewing financial documents that painted a picture of systematic fraud spanning several years. Her brother paced behind his desk, his anger barely contained as he explained what they had discovered. "Nathan's been running a sophisticated shell game," Thomas said. "He creates subsidiary companies, moves money between them to inflate revenue figures, then reports those inflated numbers to investors and lenders. It's textbook securities fraud." The private investigator, James Morton, had expanded his team to include a forensic accountant and a former FBI financial crime specialist. Their preliminary report covered 37 pages and detailed a pattern of criminal activity that went far beyond simple embezzlement. "The offshore accounts are the key," James explained, pointing to a flow chart on his laptop screen. "Nathan's been funneling money through companies in the Cayman Islands and Switzerland. On paper, it looks like legitimate international business dealings. In reality, he's been stealing from his own investors to fund his lifestyle." Zara felt sick as she looked at the numbers. Nathan had stolen over $40 million from various sources, including her own trust fund. The money had paid for the penthouse, his expensive cars, private jet travel, and gifts for Candace. "How did he think he'd get away with it?" she asked. "Arrogance," Thomas said bluntly. "And the fact that it's worked so far. His investors trusted him, his board of directors rubber-stamped his decisions, and his accountants either didn't look too closely or were paid to stay quiet." Robert entered the office carrying coffee for everyone. At 62, he moved with the confidence of a man who had spent decades building and protecting his business empire. He had been working his own network of contacts, and his expression suggested he had news. "I've been talking to some people who've had dealings with Nathan's company," Robert said, settling into a chair. "The picture isn't pretty. He's got at least 6 major clients who are already having second thoughts about their contracts." "Why?" Zara asked. "Quality issues, missed deadlines, cost overruns," Robert explained. "Nathan's been so focused on his financial schemes that he's been neglecting the actual business. His company is developing a reputation for unreliability." Tina arrived as they were reviewing the latest findings. She had been working with a family court investigator to document Nathan's fitness as a father and husband. Her report added another layer to their growing case. "I interviewed 3 of Nathan's former employees," she announced. "All of them described a hostile work environment. Verbal abuse, intimidation, sexual harassment complaints that were quietly settled. One woman said Nathan told her that wives were just temporary business partnerships that could be dissolved when they became unprofitable." The words hit Zara like a physical blow. She had known Nathan was cruel, but hearing it described so clinically made it worse somehow. "There's more," Tina continued. "Candace isn't his first affair. He's had at least 3 other serious relationships during your marriage, Zara. All of them were employees who were later forced out of the company when the relationships ended." "So this is a pattern," Thomas observed. "Exactly. Nathan uses his position to coerce women into relationships, then discards them when he's bored or when they become inconvenient. The only difference with Candace is that she's lasted longer and he's planning to make it permanent." Zara stood up and walked to the window looking out at the city below. Somewhere out there, Nathan was probably having lunch with Candace, completely unaware that his entire world was about to collapse. She felt her daughter kick as if sensing her mother's distress. "What's our timeline?" she asked without turning around. "We need to move soon," Robert said. "My contacts tell me Nathan's been having private meetings with potential buyers for his company. He might be planning to sell everything and disappear with the money before anyone discovers what he's been doing." "How soon?" Zara turned back to face the room. 2 weeks, Thomas said. "Maybe less. We need to have everything in place before he completes any sale." They spent the next hour finalizing their strategy. Robert would contact Nathan's major clients and investors, sharing just enough information to make them nervous about their business relationships. Thomas would file complaints with the Securities and Exchange Commission and other regulatory agencies. Tina would prepare a comprehensive divorce filing that would freeze Nathan's assets and prevent him from leaving the country. What about criminal charges? Zara asked. Those will come, James assured her. Once the regulatory agencies start investigating, they'll find enough evidence to hand over to prosecutors. Nathan will be facing federal charges within a month. As the meeting broke up, Robert pulled Zara aside. Are you sure you're ready for this? Once we start this process, there's no going back. Nathan will fight dirty and it's going to get ugly. Zara thought about the slap, about the text messages between Nathan and Candace, about his plan to have her committed and take her daughter. She thought about all the women he had hurt, all the investors he had cheated, all the lies he had told. I'm ready, she said firmly. Nathan made his choice when he decided to destroy me. Now he gets to live with the consequences. That night, Zara returned to the penthouse and prepared dinner as if nothing had changed. When Nathan arrived home, she greeted him with a smile and asked about his day. He seemed relaxed, confident, completely unaware of the storm gathering around him. Over dinner, he told her about his upcoming business trip to Chicago, the romantic getaway with Candace that he thought she didn't know about. I'll miss you, she said, playing her role perfectly. I'll miss you too, he lied smoothly. But this deal is important for our future. For our family's future. Zara nodded and smiled, all while knowing that Nathan's future was about to become very different from what he imagined. In 2 weeks, his world would begin falling apart. But tonight, she would let him think he was still in control. After all, the higher they fly, the harder they fall. The war room was established in Robert's private conference suite, away from the main offices where corporate spies might overhear sensitive conversations. Maps of Nathan's business empire covered the walls, marked with red pins indicating vulnerable points. Financial charts tracked money flows, partnership agreements, and contract deadlines. It looked like a military operation, which, in many ways, it was. Zara sat at the head of the table, 7 months pregnant but more focused than she had ever been in her life. The team had grown to include specialists in corporate law, financial crimes, media relations, and private security. Everyone understood the stakes. They had one chance to take down Nathan completely, and failure would leave Zara and her daughter vulnerable to his revenge. Update on the investor situation, Robert announced, reviewing his notes from a morning of phone calls. I've spoken with representatives from Nathan's 5 largest backers. They're all expressing concern about irregularities in his financial reporting. 2 of them are already considering pulling their funding. Thomas looked up from his laptop, where he was drafting regulatory complaints. The SEC complaint is ready to file. I've got enough evidence to trigger a full investigation, which will freeze Nathan's ability to move money or sell company assets. What about the criminal referral? Tina asked. The FBI's Financial Crimes Unit is interested, Thomas replied. Once the SEC opens their investigation, the criminal case will follow automatically. Nathan's looking at multiple felony charges. Zara felt a surge of satisfaction, followed immediately by a wave of sadness. This was the man she had married, the father of her unborn child. Part of her still couldn't believe it had come to this. Any word from our inside source? She asked. James nodded. Patricia from Nathan's accounting department confirmed that he's planning to move another $20 million to his offshore accounts this week. She's been secretly copying documents for us: invoices, transfer authorizations, correspondence with the banks. Patricia was a senior accountant who had been with Nathan's company for 8 years. She had approached James after learning about the investigation, revealing that she had been documenting Nathan's illegal activities for months, hoping someone would eventually hold him accountable. She's taking a huge risk, Zara observed. She knows that, James replied. But she's tired of being complicit in his crimes. She wants to testify against him when this goes to court. The media strategy was equally important. Robert had hired a top public relations firm to manage the story when it broke. The goal was to control the narrative, making sure the public understood that Zara was a victim, not a co-conspirator. The initial story will focus on domestic abuse and adultery, the PR consultant explained. Those are issues people can relate to emotionally. Once that narrative is established, we'll gradually reveal the financial crimes. By the time Nathan tries to defend himself, public opinion will already be against him. Zara's phone buzzed with a text from Nathan, leaving for Chicago tomorrow morning. Take care of yourself while I'm gone. She showed the message to the room. He's still planning his romantic getaway with Candace. Should we stop him? No, Robert said firmly. Let him go. It will be easier to serve him with papers when he's out of town and his guard is down. Plus, the photos of him with Candace in Chicago will be perfect for the media. The private investigator team had already positioned surveillance in Chicago. They would document every moment of Nathan's business trip, creating an undeniable record of his affair that would destroy his credibility when he tried to claim Zara was mentally unstable. What about Candace? Zara asked. What's her role in all this? She's been helping him hide assets, Thomas explained. Some of the offshore accounts are in her name. She's not an innocent victim, she's been an active participant in the fraud. That knowledge should have made Zara feel better, but instead it just made her feel hollow. Nathan had chosen his accomplice well. Candace was smart, attractive, and apparently as morally flexible as he was. She'll probably try to cut a deal when the investigation starts, Tina predicted. Women in her position usually do. She'll testify against Nathan in exchange for immunity. The security team briefed Zara on personal protection protocols. Once the story broke, Nathan would likely become desperate and unpredictable. They needed to ensure both Zara's safety and the integrity of their evidence. We'll have plainclothes security with you at all times, the security chief explained. Your apartment is being monitored, your car has GPS tracking, and we've installed panic buttons in your office and your father's house. It felt like preparing for war, which Zara supposed it was. Nathan had declared war on her the moment he decided to steal her money, plan her imprisonment, and take their daughter. Everything they were doing now was just fighting back. The final briefing covered the timeline for their attack. Nathan would leave for Chicago on Thursday morning. On Friday, while he was enjoying his romantic dinner with Candace, the SEC would receive their complaint and issue a hold on his company's assets. On Monday morning, when Nathan returned expecting to resume his normal life, he would find divorce papers, federal investigators, and a media storm waiting for him. Are we sure about the timing? Zara asked. Once this starts, there's no stopping it. The timing is perfect, Robert assured her. Nathan will be off balance, away from his support network and caught completely by surprise. By the time he understands what's happening, it will be too late for him to mount an effective defense. As the meeting ended, team members dispersed to handle their final preparations. Zara remained behind with her father, feeling the weight of what they were about to unleash. Any regrets? Robert asked gently. Zara thought about the question seriously. She was about to destroy the man she had once loved, the father of her child. Their daughter would grow up knowing her father was a criminal. The scandal would follow them for years. But then she remembered the slap, the contempt in Nathan's voice, the text messages planning her imprisonment. She thought about all the people he had hurt, all the money he had stolen, all the lies he had told. No regrets, she said firmly. Nathan made his choices. Now he gets to live with the consequences. Thursday morning arrived with gray skies and cold rain. From her bedroom window, Zara watched Nathan's car disappear into traffic, carrying him toward the airport and his weekend with Candace. He had kissed her goodbye, told her he loved her, promised to bring her something special from Chicago. All lies, of course. But they were the last lies Nathan Richardson would ever tell her. The countdown had begun. Friday afternoon found Nathan Richardson sipping champagne in a luxury suite at the Chicago Four Seasons, completely unaware that his empire was crumbling back in New York. He had spent the morning in meetings with potential investors, pitching a new project that would require $50 million in funding. The meetings had gone well. Nathan's charm and confidence had impressed the Chicago businessmen, just as they always did. Now he was relaxing before dinner, checking his phone for messages while Candace showered in the marble bathroom. The suite overlooked Lake Michigan, its floor-to-ceiling windows offering a spectacular view of the city skyline. Everything was perfect. Back in New York, Robert Sterling was making the phone calls that would change everything. Richardson Industries has been engaging in systematic financial fraud, he told Michael Harrison, CEO of Apex Technologies, one of Nathan's biggest clients. I'm sharing this information with you as a professional courtesy. My legal team has documented evidence of embezzlement, securities fraud, and money laundering. The silence on the other end was telling. Harrison had worked with Nathan for 3 years, and their partnership was worth over $15 million annually. That's a serious accusation, Robert, Harrison said carefully. What kind of evidence are we talking about? Bank records, email communications, testimony from inside sources, Robert replied. The SEC will be receiving a formal complaint on Monday. I thought you should know before this becomes public. Similar conversations were happening across the city. Robert's influence extended deep into New York's business community, and his reputation for integrity meant people listened when he spoke. By the end of the day, 6 of Nathan's major clients had received similar warnings. Meanwhile, Thomas was coordinating with federal investigators. The preliminary SEC complaint had been filed under seal, triggering an immediate hold on Nathan's corporate accounts. The FBI's Financial Crimes Unit was already requesting additional documentation. The beauty of this approach, Thomas explained to Tina, is that Nathan won't know what hit him until it's too late. By the time he realizes his accounts are frozen, the investigation will be too far along to stop. Zara spent Friday evening at her father's house, trying to stay calm while the first phase of their plan unfolded. She felt her daughter kicking restlessly as if sensing her mother's tension. She's going to be born into a different world, she murmured, her hand on her belly. A better world, Robert assured her. A world where her father can't hurt either of you anymore. Saturday morning brought the first cracks in Nathan's facade. His assistant called while he and Candace were having breakfast in their suite. Mr. Richardson, I'm sorry to bother you on the weekend, but we've had some unusual calls, she said nervously. 3 of our major clients have requested immediate meetings to discuss their contracts. They all seemed very concerned about something. Nathan frowned, setting down his coffee cup. What kind of concerns? They wouldn't say specifically, but they mentioned questions about our financial stability. Mr. Harrison from Apex was particularly insistent about meeting first thing Monday morning. A cold feeling settled in Nathan's stomach. Financial stability questions didn't come out of nowhere. Someone was spreading rumors about his company, and he needed to find out who. Get me a conference call with our top 5 clients for Sunday afternoon, he ordered. I want to address whatever concerns they have before this gets out of hand. But when his assistant tried to arrange the calls, she found doors that had been open for years suddenly closed. Clients who had previously been eager to speak with Nathan were now unavailable or required their legal teams to be present for any discussions. Something's wrong, Nathan told Candace as they walked along the lakefront that afternoon. Someone's been talking to my clients, spreading lies about the company. Who would do that? Candace asked, though her voice carried a note of worry. Nathan's mind was racing through possibilities. Business rivals, disgruntled employees, regulatory agencies, any of them could be behind a coordinated attack on his reputation. But the timing seemed too convenient, too orchestrated. I need to get back to New York, he decided. We're cutting the trip short. Sunday's attempted conference calls confirmed Nathan's worst fears. Of the 5 clients he tried to reach, only 2 agreed to speak with him, and both conversations were brief and uncomfortable. Nathan, I'm going to be direct, said Jennifer Walsh, CEO of Dataflow Systems. I've been hearing rumors about irregularities in your financial reporting. Are you aware of any SEC investigations into your company? Absolutely not, Nathan lied smoothly. Our books are completely clean. I don't know who's been spreading these rumors, but I intend to find out. I hope that's true, Walsh replied. But until this situation is clarified, Dataflow will be suspending our current contract negotiations. The second call went even worse. Richard Chin from Pacific Ventures was blunt in his assessment. Nathan, I've known you for 5 years and I've always respected your business acumen. But the information I'm receiving suggests serious problems with your company's finances. Until I have independent verification that everything is legitimate, Pacific Ventures is freezing all payments and considering termination of our partnership. By Sunday evening, Nathan was in full panic mode. He had cut short his romantic weekend and booked the first flight back to New York. Candace seemed nervous and withdrawn, asking questions about their future together that Nathan couldn't answer. What if the rumors are true? She asked as they waited in the airport lounge. What if there really is an investigation? There's no investigation, Nathan snapped. This is just someone trying to destroy my reputation. When I find out who's behind it, they're going to regret it. But even as he said the words, Nathan was mentally reviewing his recent activities. The offshore transfers, the creative accounting, the loans against assets that didn't technically belong to him, any of those things could trigger an investigation if someone knew where to look. The flight back to New York was turbulent, matching Nathan's mood. He spent the 3-hour journey making phone calls, trying to reach board members, investors, and business partners. Most of them were suddenly unavailable or claimed they needed to schedule formal meetings to discuss recent developments. As the plane descended toward JFK Airport, Nathan stared out at the city lights below. Somewhere down there, an enemy was systematically destroying everything he had built. He just needed to figure out who it was and how to fight back. He had no idea that the enemy was much closer than he thought, and that the real attack hadn't even begun yet. Monday morning would bring revelations that would shatter Nathan's world completely. But for now, he still believed he could salvage the situation through charm, manipulation, and sheer force of will. He was about to learn that some battles couldn't be won through intimidation and lies. Sometimes, the only way to win was to be on the right side from the beginning. And Nathan Richardson had chosen the wrong side a long time ago. Monday morning arrived with autumn sunshine streaming through the windows of the penthouse, but Nathan Richardson felt nothing but darkness ahead. He had barely slept, spending most of the night making phone calls and sending emails to his business associates. The responses had been uniformly cold and professional, a dramatic change from the warm relationships he had cultivated over years of successful partnerships. Zara was already dressed and having breakfast when Nathan emerged from his office, his hair disheveled and his expensive suit wrinkled from sleeping in his chair. She looked up from her yogurt and fruit, giving him a concerned smile that hid the satisfaction burning in her chest. "You look terrible," she said gently. "Did you sleep at all?" "There are some issues at the company," Nathan replied curtly, pouring himself coffee with shaking hands. "Nothing I can't handle, but it's going to require my full attention for the next few days." "Anything I can help with?" Zara asked innocently. Nathan's laugh was bitter. "I doubt you'd understand the complexities of corporate finance." The condescension in his voice was automatic, reflexive. Even in crisis, Nathan couldn't resist putting her down. It was exactly the kind of response Zara had been counting on, evidence of his true character that would play well in court recordings. "I should get to the office early," Nathan continued, checking his Rolex. "Try not to call unless it's an emergency." After he left, Zara allowed herself a moment of fierce joy. Phase 2 was about to begin, and Nathan had no idea what was waiting for him at Richardson Industries. At 9:17 a.m., Nathan's world began to collapse. He arrived at his corporate offices to find 2 black SUVs parked outside the building. Men in dark suits were stationed at the main entrance, checking identification and directing employees to a staging area in the lobby. Nathan's stomach dropped as he recognized the unmistakable signs of a federal investigation. "Sir, we need to see some identification," one of the agents said as Nathan approached the entrance. "This is my building," Nathan said, his voice sharp with anger and fear. "I'm Nathan Richardson, CEO of Richardson Industries." The agent spoke into his radio, then nodded. "Mr. Richardson, Special Agent Williams with the SEC Enforcement Division. We have a warrant to search these premises and seize financial records related to suspected securities fraud." Nathan's legs nearly gave out. Securities fraud. Someone had triggered a federal investigation, and it was already so far advanced that they had search warrants. "There must be some mistake," Nathan said weakly. "My company's finances are completely legitimate." "That's what we're here to determine," Agent Williams replied. "You're free to contact your attorney, but you cannot enter the building or access any company systems until our investigation is complete." Nathan stood on the sidewalk, watching federal agents carry boxes of documents out of his own building. Employees he had worked with for years walked past him without making eye contact. His secretary, Patricia, emerged with a box of personal items, her face carefully neutral. "Patricia," Nathan called out desperately. "What's happening in there? How long have they been here?" She paused, looking at him with an expression he had never seen before, not fear or respect, but something that looked almost like pity. "They've been here since 7 this morning," she said quietly. "They have warrants for everything: financial records, email servers, phone logs. They seem to know exactly what they're looking for." The implication hit Nathan like a physical blow. This wasn't a fishing expedition or a random audit. Someone had provided specific information to investigators, someone who knew exactly where the bodies were buried. His phone buzzed with an incoming call from his attorney. "Nathan, I just heard about the SEC raid. Don't say anything to anyone until I get there. And whatever you do, don't try to access any of your accounts or contact anyone about moving money." "Moving money?" Nathan repeated blankly. "Your corporate accounts have been frozen," his lawyer explained. "Emergency injunction filed this morning. You can't touch any company assets until this investigation is resolved." Nathan ended the call and stared at his phone, his mind racing. Frozen accounts meant no payroll, no operating expenses, no ability to function as a business. Even if the investigation eventually cleared him, the damage to his reputation would be irreversible. Another black SUV pulled up, and Nathan watched with growing horror as FBI agents emerged. Federal agents meant criminal charges, not just civil penalties. Someone wasn't just trying to shut down his business, they were trying to put him in prison. His phone rang again. This time it was Michael Harrison from Apex Technologies. "Nathan, I'm calling to inform you that Apex is immediately terminating all contracts with Richardson Industries," Harrison said without preamble. "Our legal team advises that we cannot risk association with a company under federal investigation." "Michael, please," Nathan began, but the line was already dead. Similar calls came throughout the morning. Client after client, partner after partner, all delivering the same message. They were cutting ties with Richardson Industries effective immediately. Years of relationship building, millions of dollars in contracts, all disappearing in a matter of hours. By noon, Nathan was sitting in his car in the parking garage, afraid to return to the penthouse where Zara was waiting. He couldn't face her questions, couldn't pretend that everything was under control when his entire world was falling apart. That's when his phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Check your email. Time for the truth." See. With trembling fingers, Nathan opened his email to find a message from Zara's private account. The subject line read, "Goodbye, Nathan." The email contained attachment screenshots of his text messages with Candace, bank records showing his financial crimes, and copies of the divorce papers that would be served later that afternoon. But it was Zara's words that cut him to the bone. "Nathan, by the time you read this, the authorities will have evidence of your financial crimes and your plan to have me committed after our daughter's birth. I know about Candace, about the stolen money, about your plan to take everything from me. I know because I've been watching, learning, and planning. You taught me that business is war and that the strongest player wins. Today you learned that you're not the strongest player anymore. You should have remembered that I'm Robert Sterling's daughter before you decided to destroy me. Zara." Nathan stared at the email for a long time, the pieces finally falling into place. Robert Sterling. Of course. Zara's father had the connections, the resources, and the motivation to orchestrate this kind of coordinated attack. Nathan had been so focused on controlling Zara that he had forgotten about the powerful family backing her up. He called Zara's number, but it went straight to voicemail. He called the penthouse landline, but it just rang endlessly. She was gone, probably had been gone since before he left that morning. As he sat in his car, watching federal agents swarm through his building, Nathan realized that he had lost everything. His business, his reputation, his freedom, and the woman he had planned to discard anyway. Worst of all, he had lost to someone he had dismissed as weak and helpless. The irony was bitter. He had been planning to destroy Zara, but she had destroyed him first. And she had done it using the same ruthless tactics he had always admired: careful planning, strategic alliances, and the willingness to show no mercy to an enemy. Nathan Richardson had taught his wife to be a warrior. Now he was about to learn just how good a student she had been. The law offices of Sterling, Rodriguez and Associates buzzed with controlled chaos as Zara's legal team prepared for the fight of their lives. War rooms had been established on 2 floors, with teams of attorneys, investigators, and support staff working around the clock to coordinate multiple legal actions against Nathan Richardson. Zara sat in the main conference room, 7.5 months pregnant but radiating calm determination. She had moved out of the penthouse the morning of the raid, taking only her personal belongings and leaving behind the life she had built with Nathan. Her new apartment was smaller but felt infinitely larger without the weight of his presence. "Update on the criminal case," Thomas announced, entering with fresh coffee and a stack of legal documents. "The FBI has expanded their investigation to include wire fraud, money laundering, and racketeering charges. Nathan's looking at 20 to 30 years in federal prison if convicted on all counts." Tina looked up from her laptop, where she was reviewing divorce filings. "His attorney filed a motion to dismiss our domestic violence claims, arguing that one incident doesn't constitute a pattern of abuse. They're also challenging our character evidence." "What about the text messages?" Zara asked. "They're trying to have them excluded, claiming privacy violations," Tina replied. "But since you were the intended victim of the conspiracy they describe, they should be admissible." The media coverage had been intense. Nathan's arrest photograph, disheveled, defeated, wearing the orange jumpsuit of the county jail, had appeared on every major news outlet. The story had everything: wealth, betrayal, domestic violence, financial crimes, and a pregnant wife fighting back against a corrupt husband. Public opinion was overwhelmingly on Zara's side. Social media was full of supporters calling her brave and strong. Women's advocacy groups had embraced her as a symbol of resistance against abusive men who used their wealth and power to control their victims. "The bankruptcy trustee wants to meet tomorrow," James Morton announced, joining the group. Nathan's company is formally insolvent. His debts exceed his assets by about $40 million. How is that possible? Zara asked. I thought he was wealthy. On paper he was, James explained. But most of his apparent wealth was stolen money or inflated asset values. The offshore accounts we've identified contain about $12 million, but that money belongs to his investors and creditors. Robert Sterling entered the conference room carrying a tablet with the latest news coverage. At 62, he looked energized rather than tired by the legal battle. This was the kind of corporate warfare he had been fighting his entire career, and he was winning. Nathan's board of directors just held an emergency meeting, Robert announced. They formally removed him as CEO and voted to cooperate fully with federal investigators. His own company is now working against him. The betrayal of Nathan's board was particularly sweet. These were men who had profited from his leadership for years, taking bonuses and stock options while turning a blind eye to his questionable practices. Now they were desperate to distance themselves from him before they faced their own legal troubles. What about Candace? Zara asked. She's hired her own attorney and is negotiating a plea deal, Thomas replied. Her lawyer contacted the prosecutor's office this morning. She's willing to testify against Nathan in exchange for immunity from prosecution. Zara felt a complex mix of emotions about Nathan's mistress. Part of her was satisfied that Candace was facing consequences for her role in the fraud. But another part almost felt sorry for her. She had been manipulated by Nathan just like everyone else, even if she had been a willing participant. The divorce proceedings are moving quickly, Tina continued. Nathan's attorney is trying to negotiate a settlement, but they don't have much leverage. With his assets frozen and his credibility destroyed, he can't afford a prolonged legal battle. What are they offering? Zara asked. Shared custody of the baby, no alimony, and a 50-50 split of any remaining assets after the criminal case is resolved, Tina replied. It's insulting, honestly. They're acting like Nathan is the victim here. Counter with full custody, supervised visitation only, and complete forfeiture of any claims to the baby's trust fund, Robert suggested. Nathan is going to prison. He has no business making decisions about a child's welfare. The strategy was working perfectly. Every move Nathan's team made seemed desperate and defensive. They were fighting multiple battles simultaneously: criminal charges, civil lawsuits, regulatory investigations, and divorce proceedings, while Zara's team had the luxury of coordination and preparation. There's something else, James said, his expression serious. Our investigation has uncovered evidence that Nathan was planning to leave the country. He had a passport under a false name and travel arrangements to a non-extradition country. If we hadn't moved when we did, he might have disappeared with all the money. The revelation sent a chill through the room. Nathan hadn't just been planning to divorce Zara and steal her assets, he had been planning to abandon his daughter entirely and start a new life somewhere beyond the reach of American law. He was going to take the money and run, Zara said quietly. Leave me imprisoned in a mental institution and our daughter without a father. But he didn't, Robert said firmly. Because you were stronger and smarter than he gave you credit for. You fought back and you won. As the meeting continued, Zara felt her daughter kicking vigorously, as if responding to the intensity of the discussion. She was going to be born into a complicated situation: her father in prison, her mother rebuilding her life, the family name associated with scandal and legal battles. But she would also be born into freedom. Free from Nathan's control, free from his manipulation, free to grow up knowing that her mother had fought for her right to a safe and honest life. What's the timeline for resolution? Zara asked. The criminal trial will probably start in 6 months, Thomas replied. The divorce should be finalized well before then. And the civil suits against Nathan's company will take years to resolve, but that's not really our concern anymore. 6 months, Zara repeated. By then, her daughter would be born and she would be starting her new life as a single mother. It seemed both impossibly far away and frighteningly close. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. This isn't over. You'll regret what you've done to me. The threat was clearly from Nathan, probably sent from someone else's phone since his communications were being monitored. Zara showed the message to her security team, who immediately contacted the prosecutor's office. He's violating the restraining order, Tina observed. This just gave us more ammunition for the custody fight. Even from jail, Nathan was making the same mistakes that had gotten him into trouble in the first place. He couldn't resist trying to control and intimidate, even when it only made his situation worse. Let him keep digging his own grave, Robert said grimly. Every threat he makes just proves we were right about his character. As the legal team dispersed to handle their various responsibilities, Zara remained in the conference room with her father. Outside the windows, the city continued its daily business, unaware of the corporate drama playing out in courtrooms and law offices. "Any regrets?" Robert asked, repeating the question he had posed weeks earlier. Zara thought about Nathan sitting in jail, his empire destroyed, his future reduced to legal proceedings and prison sentences. She thought about their daughter, who would grow up without a father but also without fear. "No regrets," she said firmly. "Nathan chose this path when he decided to hurt me. Everything that happens to him now is just justice." The war was far from over, but the outcome was no longer in doubt. Nathan Richardson had picked the wrong enemy, and now he was paying the price for his arrogance. 6 weeks after the federal raid, Nathan Richardson sat in a stark conference room at the Metropolitan Correctional Center, staring at documents that represented the complete collapse of his life. His orange jumpsuit was a far cry from the $1,000 suits he used to wear, and the fluorescent lighting cast harsh shadows on his face, making him look older and more haggard than his 38 years. Across the metal table sat his defense attorney, looking tired and frustrated. The evidence against Nathan was overwhelming and they both knew it. Bank records, email communications, witness testimony, and financial documents painted a clear picture of systematic fraud spanning multiple years. "The prosecutor's office has made their final offer," his lawyer said, sliding a document across the table. 15 years in federal prison, full restitution of stolen funds and permanent forfeiture of all assets. In exchange, they'll drop the racketeering charges and recommend minimum security placement. Nathan read the plea agreement with growing despair. 15 years. He would be 53 when he was released, assuming he served the full sentence. His daughter would be a teenager who barely remembered him. His business empire would be a footnote in financial crime textbooks. "What if I go to trial?" he asked weakly. "You'll lose," his attorney replied bluntly. "The evidence is overwhelming and public opinion is completely against you. A jury trial would probably result in 25 to 30 years, maximum security. Plus, the civil suits would continue, and you'd be personally liable for millions in damages." The civil suits had been devastating. Investors who had lost money were demanding compensation. Employees who had been fired when the company collapsed were suing for wrongful termination. Even the government was seeking treble damages for the tax fraud charges. "What about my daughter?" Nathan asked. "What about custody rights?" His lawyer's expression grew even grimmer. "Nathan, you need to face reality. You're going to federal prison. The family court judge has already indicated that supervised visitation is the best you can hope for, and that's only if Zara agrees to it." The divorce proceedings had been a complete disaster for Nathan. With his assets frozen and his credibility destroyed, he had no leverage to negotiate. Zara's legal team had presented overwhelming evidence of abuse, fraud, and abandonment. The judge had been particularly harsh in his comments about Nathan's plan to have his pregnant wife committed to a mental institution. Mr. Richardson showed a callous disregard for his wife's well-being and a calculated plan to deprive her of her freedom and parental rights, the judge had written in his ruling. His actions demonstrate a pattern of manipulation and control that makes him unfit for unsupervised contact with any child. A guard appeared at the conference room door. "Time's up," he announced. Nathan's lawyer gathered his documents. "I need an answer on the plea agreement by tomorrow. The offer expires at 5 p.m. After his lawyer left, Nathan was escorted back to his cell, a 6 by 8 foot concrete box he shared with a drug dealer from Queens. The man was sleeping on the lower bunk, leaving Nathan to climb up to his thin mattress and stare at the ceiling. He thought about Zara, probably at home in her new apartment, preparing for their daughter's birth. The baby was due any day now, and Nathan would miss it entirely. He would miss everything: first steps, first words, birthdays, Christmas mornings, school plays. The irony was bitter. He had been so focused on controlling Zara that he had lost control of everything else. His plan to steal her money and take their daughter had backfired spectacularly, leaving him with nothing and no one. His cellmate stirred and sat up, studying Nathan with curious eyes. "You're that rich guy, right? The one who beat up his pregnant wife." "I never beat her up," Nathan said automatically. "It was one slap. One time." The drug dealer laughed harshly. "Man, you don't get it, do you? One slap to a pregnant woman is one slap too many. No wonder she destroyed you." The words stung because they were true. Nathan had spent weeks trying to rationalize his actions, telling himself that he was under stress, that Zara had provoked him, that it wasn't really abuse. But sitting in a jail cell, facing the ruin of everything he had worked for, the excuses sounded hollow even to him. A news report was playing on the television in the common area, and Nathan could see his own face on the screen, a corporate headshot from better days. The reporter was discussing the latest developments in his case. Richardson Industries officially declared bankruptcy today, leaving hundreds of employees without jobs and investors facing massive losses. Federal prosecutors say this case represents one of the largest corporate fraud schemes in recent New York history. The camera cut to footage of his former office building, now bearing signs for the bankruptcy trustee and federal investigators. Employees Nathan had worked with for years were being interviewed, describing a hostile work environment and suspicious financial practices they had been afraid to report. "He was always angry about something," said Patricia, his former secretary. "Yelling at people, making unreasonable demands. We all knew something wasn't right with the company's finances, but he made it clear that asking questions would cost us our jobs." The betrayal from his own employees was particularly painful. These were people Nathan had thought were loyal, people he had paid good salaries and given opportunities for advancement. Now they were lining up to testify against him, eager to distance themselves from his downfall. The news report concluded with footage of Zara leaving a medical appointment, her pregnancy clearly visible. She looked healthy and confident, surrounded by security guards but walking with her head held high. The reporter noted that she had started a foundation to help women escape abusive relationships, using her settlement money to fund counseling services and legal aid. Even in victory, Zara was finding ways to help others. It was exactly the kind of gesture that would win her more public support and make Nathan look even worse by comparison. That evening, Nathan called his mother from the jail's payphone. She had been his only visitor since his arrest, though even she seemed to struggle with accepting what he had done. "Nathan, honey, you need to take that plea agreement," she said, her voice thick with tears. 15 years is better than 30. At least you'll still have time to rebuild when you get out." "Rebuild what?" Nathan asked bitterly. "My reputation is destroyed. My company is gone. My wife hates me. My daughter will grow up thinking I'm a monster." "Then you need to prove her wrong," his mother replied firmly. "Use these years to become a better man. Show your daughter that people can change, that they can learn from their mistakes." After the call ended, Nathan returned to his cell and lay on his bunk, staring at the concrete ceiling. His cellmate was right, he still didn't get it. He was still thinking about this as something that had happened to him, rather than something he had caused through his own choices. The slap hadn't been an isolated incident. It had been the culmination of years of emotional abuse, financial manipulation, and attempts to control every aspect of Zara's life. He had treated her like a possession rather than a person, and when she had finally fought back, he had been completely unprepared for her strength. Tomorrow he would sign the plea agreement and formally admit to crimes that would send him to federal prison for 15 years. His empire was gone, his marriage was over, and his daughter would grow up without him. But perhaps, if he was very lucky and worked very hard, he might eventually earn the chance to be a small part of her life. Not as the controlling father he had planned to be, but as someone who had learned from his mistakes and could offer her something positive. It wasn't the life Nathan Richardson had planned, but it was the only life he had left. The next morning, he signed the papers that would send him to prison and closed the final chapter on his business empire. The boy who had dreamed of building a corporate dynasty had become a man whose legacy would be measured in lives destroyed and money stolen. But in a strange way, signing those papers was also the first honest thing Nathan had done in years. Spring sunlight streamed through the windows of Zara's new office, casting warm patterns across the polished hardwood floors. The space was smaller than Nathan's corporate suite had been, but it felt infinitely more welcoming. Photos of women and children covered one wall, clients who had been helped by the Sterling Foundation for Family Justice, the non-profit organization Zara had established 6 months after her daughter's birth. Zara sat behind her desk, reviewing grant applications while her 8-month-old daughter, Hope, played in a portable crib nearby. The baby had Nathan's dark hair but Zara's bright, curious eyes. She was a happy child, surrounded by love from her mother, grandfather, uncle, and extended family. "Mrs. Richardson?" Her assistant knocked on the open door. "Ms. Rodriguez is here for your meeting." Tina entered carrying coffee for both of them and a small toy for Hope. She had become not just Zara's lawyer but one of her closest friends, helping her navigate the complex world of nonprofit management while continuing to handle the legal aftermath of Nathan's crimes. "How's our favorite little girl?" Tina asked, reaching into the crib to pick up Hope, who gurgled happily and reached for Tina's colorful scarf. "She's perfect," Zara said, smiling at the sight of her daughter. "Growing so fast I can barely keep up with her clothing sizes." They settled into the comfortable chairs by the window, Hope content to play with her toy while the adults talked business. The Sterling Foundation had grown rapidly, funded by Zara's divorce settlement and donations from supporters who had followed her story in the media. Update on the Richardson case, Tina said, consulting her tablet. Nathan was transferred to a federal facility in Pennsylvania last week. Minimum security as promised in his plea agreement. He's been assigned to the prison's financial literacy program, teaching other inmates about budgeting and debt management. The irony wasn't lost on either of them. Nathan, who had stolen millions through financial fraud, was now helping other criminals learn to manage money honestly. Has he asked about visitation? Zara asked. His attorney submitted a formal request last month, Tina replied. Supervised visits only in a family court setting. You have complete discretion to approve or deny the request. Zara looked at Hope, who was babbling contentedly while chewing on her toy. For months, she had dreaded this moment, the decision about whether to allow Nathan any contact with their daughter. Part of her wanted to protect Hope from any connection to her father's criminal legacy. But another part recognized that completely severing that relationship might ultimately hurt Hope more than it helped her. What does Dr. Martinez recommend? Zara asked, referring to the child psychologist she had consulted. She thinks occasional supervised visits might be beneficial, but only if Nathan demonstrates genuine remorse and a commitment to change, Tina replied. She also recommends waiting until Hope is older and can better understand the situation. So not yet. Not yet. Maybe when she's 3 or 4 if Nathan has shown consistent good behavior and completed therapy programs. Robert Sterling arrived for their weekly lunch meeting, bringing flowers for Zara and a new book for Hope. At 63, he had embraced his role as a grandfather with enthusiasm, often joking that Hope was his favorite business partner. How are the expansion plans coming along? He asked, settling into a chair and reaching for Hope, who immediately crawled toward him with delighted squeals. Better than expected, Zara replied, pulling up financial reports on her laptop. We've received funding requests from organizations in 12 states. The model is definitely scalable. The Sterling Foundation provided legal aid, counseling services, and financial support to women escaping abusive relationships. It also funded research into domestic violence prevention and worked with lawmakers to strengthen protective legislation. I have some news, Robert announced. The Justice Department is using our case study in their new training program for financial crimes prosecutors. Nathan's case is now being taught as an example of how corporate fraud and domestic abuse often intersect. It was satisfying to know that their battle against Nathan was helping other women in similar situations. The foundation had already assisted over 200 families, providing everything from emergency housing to legal representation to job training. There's something else, Robert continued. I received a call from Nathan's mother yesterday. She wanted to know if there was any possibility of reconciliation. Zara's expression hardened. Nathan's family had been supportive during his trial, but they had also minimized his crimes and suggested that Zara was partially responsible for the breakdown of their marriage. What did you tell her? Zara asked. That reconciliation was impossible, but that we weren't vindictive people, Robert replied. If Nathan genuinely changes, if he completes his sentence and demonstrates real remorse, we might consider allowing him some limited contact with Hope when she's older. A very diplomatic answer, Tina observed. Hope had fallen asleep in Robert's arms, her small fist curled around his finger. She looked peaceful and secure, completely unaware of the complicated history surrounding her birth. She's going to ask questions eventually, Zara said quietly. About her father, about why he's not here. When that time comes, we'll tell her the truth, Robert said firmly. Age appropriately but honestly. She deserves to know that her father made serious mistakes, but also that people can change and grow. And if he doesn't change? Zara asked. Then she'll know that too, Robert replied. But she'll also know that she has a family who loves her unconditionally, and that she's strong enough to overcome any challenge. As they finished their meeting, Zara reflected on how much her life had changed in the past year. The scared, isolated woman who had been slapped in a hospital corridor was gone, replaced by someone who had discovered her own strength and used it to help others. Her phone buzzed with a text from Thomas. Just got word that the last of Nathan's civil cases settled. The investors recovered about 60% of their losses. Case officially closed. It was the final legal chapter in Nathan's downfall. His corporate empire was now completely dismantled, his assets distributed to creditors and victims. The man who had once commanded boardrooms and manipulated millions of dollars was now earning 20 cents an hour in a prison laundry. Justice served, Tina observed, reading over Zara's shoulder. Justice served, Zara agreed. But more importantly, she had built something positive from the wreckage of her marriage. The foundation was thriving, Hope was healthy and happy, and Zara had found her purpose in helping other women escape the kind of situation she had survived. That evening, Zara sat in the nursery of her apartment, feeding Hope her bedtime bottle. The room was painted in soft pastels, filled with books and toys and photos of family. It was peaceful, safe, filled with love, everything Nathan's penthouse had never been. "Your mommy was very brave," she whispered to Hope, who was drowsily finishing her bottle. "She fought some bad people and won. And someday when you're old enough, I'll tell you the whole story." Hope's eyes drifted closed, completely content in her mother's arms. Outside the window, the city lights twinkled like stars, and somewhere in the distance, Nathan Richardson was beginning his 15th year in federal prison. But in this quiet nursery, none of that mattered. What mattered was the future, bright, hopeful, and completely under Zara's control. She had taken back her power, protected her daughter, and built a new life on her own terms. Nathan had tried to destroy her, but instead, he had unleashed a strength she never knew she possessed. And that strength would ensure that Hope Sterling Richardson grew up knowing that no one, no matter how wealthy or powerful, had the right to hurt the people they claimed to love. The war was over. Justice had been served. And the best revenge of all was the happy, successful life Zara was building without Nathan Richardson in it. As she placed Hope in her crib and turned on the nightlight, Zara smiled. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to help other women, new chances to make the world a little bit safer for families like hers. Nathan had taught her that the world could be cruel and dangerous. But Hope would learn something different, that good people could fight back against cruelty, that strength came from helping others, and that sometimes the most powerful thing you could do was simply refuse to be a victim. It was a lesson worth learning and a legacy worth leaving. The sound echoed through the kitchen like a gunshot. Camila's head snapped to the side, her cheek burning with a fire that spread down her neck and into her chest. She stood frozen by the stove, the wooden spoon still gripped in her trembling hand, watching as the pasta sauce bubbled and popped, completely unaware that her world had just shattered again. "You worthless piece of trash," Derek's voice cut through the silence like broken glass. "I told you dinner better be ready by 6:30. It's 6:45. Camila's dark eyes filled with tears as she touched her stinging cheek. The beautiful African-American woman who had once commanded attention wherever she walked now cowered in her own kitchen, her natural radiance dimmed by months of fear and pain. Her silk press hair, usually perfectly styled, hung limp around her shoulders, and her designer dress from happier times now seemed to hang on her smaller frame like a costume from another life. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the simmering sauce. "The traffic was bad when I came back from the grocery store, and then the pasta took longer than—" "Shut up." Derek's hand rose again and Camila instinctively ducked, protecting her face with her arms. "I don't want to hear your pathetic excuses. You had one job today. One simple job. Make dinner and have it ready on time." Derek paced the kitchen like a caged animal, his business suit wrinkled from a long day at the law firm where he worked as a junior partner. His brown hair was disheveled, and his face was red with rage that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than just a late dinner. This was about control, about power, about making sure Camila knew exactly where she stood in their marriage. "Look at this mess," he continued, gesturing wildly at the perfectly clean kitchen where only a few pots sat on the stove. "You can't even keep a simple kitchen organized. No wonder you can't hold down a job. No wonder nobody wants to be around you anymore." The words hit harder than the slap. Camila closed her eyes and tried to remember the woman she used to be. 3 years ago, she had been the head marketing coordinator at a prestigious advertising firm. She had friends who called her every weekend, a social calendar that was always full, and dreams that seemed within her reach. She had been confident, successful, and happy. Then she met Derek at a charity gala. He had been charming, attentive, and everything she thought she wanted in a husband. The courtship had been a whirlwind of expensive dinners, weekend getaways, and promises of a future together. He had proposed after only 8 months and she had said yes, convinced she had found her soulmate. The changes started small. Derek suggested she quit her job after the wedding so she could focus on being a wife and eventually a mother. He convinced her to cut ties with friends he deemed negative influences. He gradually isolated her from her family, claiming they didn't understand their relationship. By the time she realized what was happening, she was completely dependent on him, financially and emotionally trapped in a prison of his making. Are you even listening to me? Derek's voice brought her back to the present. He was standing directly in front of her now, his face inches from hers. She could smell the alcohol on his breath, even though he claimed he had been at work all day. Yes, she said quickly. I'm listening. Good. Because I'm only going to say this once more. In this house you follow my rules. You do what I say when I say it, how I say it. You are nothing without me. You have nothing without me. And if you ever embarrass me again by serving dinner late, there will be consequences you won't like. Camila nodded, tears streaming down her face. She had learned not to argue, not to defend herself, not to do anything that might make him angrier. The bruises from their last fight had only just faded, hidden carefully under makeup and long sleeves. Derek grabbed the plate she had prepared for him and stalked out of the kitchen toward the dining room. Clean this up and bring me a beer, he called over his shoulder. And next time, remember that punctuality is respect. Since you clearly don't respect me, maybe you don't deserve my respect either. Alone in the kitchen, Camila finally allowed herself to breathe. She turned off the burner and moved the sauce to a back burner, her hands shaking as she tried to compose herself. In the reflection of the stainless steel refrigerator, she could see the red handprint on her cheek, already starting to swell. She opened the freezer and pulled out a bag of frozen peas, pressing it gently against her face. The cold numbed the pain but couldn't touch the deeper hurt that lived in her chest, the constant ache of knowing she was trapped with no way out. As she stood there in the kitchen that had once been her sanctuary, Camila tried to remember what hope felt like. She tried to remember what it was like to wake up in the morning without fear, to speak without measuring every word, to exist without constantly walking on eggshells. But tonight, like every night for the past 2 years, hope seemed like a luxury she couldn't afford. Tonight, all she could do was survive until tomorrow and pray that tomorrow would somehow be different. She had no idea that change was already on its way, traveling down the highway in a military convoy, carried by 3 men who would soon turn her world upside down in the best possible way. Camila moved through the dining room like a ghost, setting Derek's beer down beside his plate with the careful precision of someone who had learned that even the smallest mistake could trigger an explosion. Derek didn't look up from his phone, scrolling through what appeared to be work emails while mechanically eating the dinner she had prepared. The silence stretched between them, heavy and oppressive. Once upon a time, dinner had been their favorite time together. They would share stories about their days, plan weekend adventures, and laugh until their sides hurt. Now, the only sounds were the clink of Derek's fork against his plate and the distant hum of the air conditioning. Camila retreated to the kitchen and began cleaning up, moving with practiced efficiency. Every motion was calculated to minimize noise. She had learned that even the sound of dishes clinking together too loudly could set Derek off on another tirade about her carelessness and stupidity. As she washed the pots, her mind drifted to her sister Rachel, who lived 3 states away. They used to talk every day, sharing everything from work gossip to relationship advice. Rachel had been her maid of honor, the one person who had expressed quiet concerns about Derek's controlling behavior during their engagement. I just think he's a little intense, Rachel had said the night before the wedding. Are you sure you're ready for this? Camila had laughed off her sister's concerns then, convinced that Derek's protectiveness was a sign of how much he loved her. She had been so wrong, but by the time she realized it, Derek had convinced her to change her phone number, claiming her family was too demanding of her time. Now she hadn't spoken to Rachel in over a year. She had no idea if her sister was still working at the hospital, if she had started dating that doctor she had mentioned, or if she even thought about Camila anymore. Derek had made sure that all of her old relationships withered and died, leaving her completely dependent on him for human connection. The bag of frozen peas had warmed against her cheek, so she returned it to the freezer and examined her reflection in the microwave door. The swelling was getting worse, and she knew that by morning she would have a bruise that would take careful makeup application to hide. She had become an expert at concealing Derek's handiwork. Foundation that was 2 shades too dark for her natural skin tone to cover fingerprint bruises on her arms. Long sleeves in summer to hide marks on her wrists. Scarves to cover the time he had grabbed her throat during an argument about her spending too much time reading instead of cleaning. The worst part wasn't the physical pain though. It was the way Derek had slowly erased the person she used to be. The confident woman who had once given presentations to rooms full of executives had been replaced by someone who apologized for breathing too loudly. The social butterfly who had organized charity events and dinner parties now spent her days alone in the house, too embarrassed to go out in public and risk running into someone who might ask questions about her bruises. Camila. Derek's voice boomed from the dining room. Where's dessert? Her heart sank. She had forgotten about dessert in the chaos of trying to get dinner ready on time. There was ice cream in the freezer, but Derek had very specific expectations about how his meals should be presented. Ice cream served straight from the container would be seen as lazy and disrespectful. "Coming?" she called back, trying to keep the panic out of her voice. She quickly pulled out the vanilla ice cream and scooped it into a bowl, then drizzled chocolate sauce over the top in what she hoped was an attractive pattern. Her hands were shaking again, making the sauce wobble unevenly across the ice cream. When she carried the bowl into the dining room, Derek looked up at her with disgust. "This looks like something a child would make," he said, pushing the bowl away. "I work hard all day to provide for us, and this is the effort you put into taking care of me?" "I can make something else," Camila offered quickly. "I think we have some cake mix in the pantry." "I could." "Forget it." Derek stood up abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the hardwood floor. "I'm going to my office to finish some work. Maybe by the time I'm done, you'll have figured out how to be a proper wife." He left the dining room without another word, leaving Camila standing there with the rejected dessert in her hands. She heard his office door slam shut, followed by the sound of his computer starting up. She knew he would be in there for hours, probably drinking the expensive whiskey he kept hidden in his desk drawer and playing online poker instead of working. Camila returned to the kitchen and sat down at the small breakfast table where she used to eat her morning coffee and read the news. Now she rarely bothered with the news. The outside world felt so far away from her current reality that it might as well have been fiction. She picked up her phone, a basic model that Derek had insisted on after claiming her smartphone was too expensive to maintain. The contact list was almost empty now. Derek's number, the grocery store, her doctor, and a few other essential services. All the friends who had once filled her life with laughter and support had been slowly deleted, one by one, as Derek convinced her they were jealous of their happiness or were bad influences on their marriage. Sometimes, late at night when Derek was asleep, she would lie in bed and try to remember her friends' phone numbers. Sarah from her old job, who used to take her out for drinks every Friday. Michelle from her yoga class, who had become like a sister to her during their weekend hiking adventures. Even her college roommate Jessica, who had flown in for her wedding and who had sent Christmas cards for the first year of her marriage before giving up when Camila never responded. But remembering their numbers was useless. Even if she could call them, what would she say? How could she explain that the confident, successful woman they had known had become this scared, isolated shell of a person? How could she admit that she had allowed someone to take away everything that had made her who she was? The sound of Derek's voice drifted from his office, loud and animated as he talked to someone on the phone. Probably one of his poker buddies, making plans for another boys' night out that would leave her alone in the house until the early hours of the morning, wondering if he was coming home at all. Camila touched her cheek again, feeling the heat radiating from the swollen skin. Tomorrow she would apply concealer with expert precision and venture out to the grocery store, keeping her head down and avoiding eye contact with anyone who might notice her injuries. She would buy ingredients for meals that Derek might or might not approve of, trying to anticipate his moods and preferences with the desperation of someone whose safety depended on reading invisible signs. But tonight, she would go to bed early, taking 2 of the pain relievers she kept hidden in her makeup bag, and try to fall asleep before Derek decided he wanted to continue their earlier conversation. Sleep was her only escape now, the only time when she could dream about the life she used to have and the woman she used to be. As she turned off the kitchen lights and headed upstairs, Camila had no way of knowing that 300 miles away, a military convoy was making its way through the night, carrying the only people who might be able to save her from the prison her marriage had become. The next morning arrived with the sound of Derek's alarm at precisely 6 a.m., followed by his usual routine of showering, shaving, and criticizing everything from the temperature of his coffee to the way Camila had ironed his shirts. By 7:30 he was gone, leaving behind only the lingering scent of his expensive cologne and a list of tasks he expected completed before he returned home. Camila stood at the kitchen window, watching Derek's black BMW disappear down their suburban street. The morning sun cast long shadows across their perfectly manicured lawn, a lawn that Derek paid a service to maintain because he claimed Camila couldn't be trusted with anything important. She touched her cheek gingerly. The swelling had gone down slightly overnight, but the bruise was now a deep purple that would require careful makeup application if she needed to go anywhere public. She had become an expert at color correction, layering different shades of concealer to hide the evidence of Derek's anger. The house felt enormous and empty with Derek gone. It was a beautiful house, she had to admit. 4 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms, a gourmet kitchen, and a backyard that looked like something from a home improvement magazine. Derek had chosen it without consulting her, presenting it as a surprise gift after their honeymoon. At the time, she had been touched by his thoughtfulness. Now, she understood it was just another way to control her, trapping her in a suburban paradise that felt more like an elegant prison. Camila made herself a cup of tea and sat at the breakfast table with Derek's list. Dry cleaning pickup, grocery shopping for a dinner party he was hosting for some colleagues next week, calling the landscaping service about the sprinkler system, organizing his office files. None of the tasks were particularly difficult, but they would fill her entire day, leaving no time for anything that might bring her joy or fulfillment. She had just started making notes about the dinner party menu when she heard the rumble of large vehicles outside. Through the front window, she could see 2 military trucks pulling into their driveway, their olive green paint and official markings stark against the pristine suburban landscape. Camila's heart began to race. Had something happened to Derek? Was there some kind of emergency? She quickly checked her appearance in the hallway mirror, making sure her bruise was adequately covered, and opened the front door just as 3 men in military uniforms climbed out of the trucks. The man in the lead was tall and broad-shouldered, with the same dark hair and strong jawline as Derek, but where Derek's face had grown hard and cruel over the years, this man's expression was kind and open. Behind him walked 2 other soldiers, both African-American men who carried themselves with the confident bearing of people who had seen the world and understood their place in it. "Ma'am," the first man said, removing his cap as he approached the door. "I'm Staff Sergeant James Hamilton. I believe I'm Derek's brother. These are my colleagues, Sergeant Michael Johnson and Corporal Kevin Washington. We were hoping Derek might be home." Camila's mouth fell open. James. Derek's younger brother, who had been deployed overseas for the past 3 years. Derek rarely talked about his family, and when he did, it was usually to criticize them for not understanding his success or appreciating how far he had come from their working-class background. "He's at work," she managed to say, suddenly conscious of how she must look to these men who knew Derek from before he became the person he was now. "I'm Camila, his wife." "He's mentioned you, of course, but I didn't know you were coming to visit." James smiled, and the resemblance to Derek was striking, but there was warmth in his eyes that Derek's had lost years ago. "We just got back stateside yesterday. Thought we'd surprise him. We have a few days of leave before we report to our new assignment." "Please come in," Camila said, stepping back to let them enter. "Can I get you something to drink? Coffee? Water?" "Coffee would be great, ma'am," Sergeant Johnson said. His voice was deep and gentle, and when he smiled, Camila noticed that his eyes crinkled at the corners in a way that suggested he smiled often. "It's been a long drive from Fort Bragg." As they settled in the living room, Camila busied herself in the kitchen, grateful for something to do with her hands. She could hear the men talking quietly among themselves, their voices carrying the easy camaraderie of people who had been through difficult experiences together. "Your home is beautiful," Corporal Washington said when she returned with a tray of coffee and the pastries she had been saving for Derek's breakfast. "You must be very proud of what you and Derek have built together." The innocent comment hit Camila like a physical blow. What they had built together. If only he knew that she had built nothing, that every decision from the color of the walls to the furniture arrangement had been Derek's choice, usually made without consulting her or after dismissing her opinions as irrelevant. "Thank you," she said quietly, taking a seat in the chair farthest from the men. It was a habit now, always positioning herself near an exit, always maintaining distance in case she needed to escape quickly. James studied her with the sharp eyes of someone trained to notice details. His gaze lingered on her face, and she wondered if her makeup was as effective as she had hoped. Military men were probably trained to spot injuries, to notice when something wasn't right. "So what does Derek do for work now?" James asked. "Last I heard, he had just started at some law firm." "He's a junior partner now," Camila said, repeating the words Derek used to describe his position. "He works very hard. Long hours. He's very dedicated to his career." "And what about you?" Sergeant Johnson asked. "What do you do?" The question was innocent enough, but it sent a wave of shame through Camila that was almost overwhelming. What did she do? She existed. She survived. She tried to anticipate Derek's needs and moods well enough to avoid his anger. She had once been someone with ambitions and talents and dreams, but that person felt like a stranger now. "I take care of the house," she said finally. "Make sure everything runs smoothly for Derek." The 3 men exchanged glances that didn't go unnoticed by Camila. There was something in their expressions, a flicker of concern or confusion that made her wonder what Derek had told them about his life, about their marriage. "That's important work too," Corporal Washington said kindly. Keeping a home running smoothly is no small task. Before Camila could respond, they all heard the sound of Derek's car in the driveway. Her entire body tensed automatically, the way it always did when she heard that particular engine sound. Derek was home early, which usually meant something had gone wrong at work, which usually meant he would be looking for someone to blame. "That must be him now," James said, standing up as the front door opened. Derek's voice boomed through the house before he even made it to the living room. "Camila, whose trucks are in our driveway? If you invited someone over without asking me first, I swear to God." He stopped mid-sentence when he saw the three uniformed men standing in his living room. For just a moment, his face showed genuine surprise and what might have been pleasure at seeing his brother. But then his expression hardened, and Camila saw the calculating look that always appeared when Derek was trying to figure out how to control a situation. "James," he said, his voice carefully modulated now. "What a surprise. What brings you to my home?" The words, "my home," were emphasized just enough to make it clear that Derek saw this as his territory, his domain where he made the rules. Camila had heard that tone before, usually right before Derek launched into a lecture about respect and boundaries and knowing one's place. "Just wanted to see my big brother," James said easily, seemingly unaware of the tension that had suddenly filled the room. "And meet the wife you've been hiding from us." Derek's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Camila knew that look, knew that something about this unexpected visit was already irritating him. The fact that she had let the men into the house without his permission, the fact that they had seen her before he could prepare them for what they should think about his marriage, the fact that his carefully controlled world had been disrupted by people he couldn't intimidate or manipulate. This was going to be a very interesting visit. Derek moved into the living room with the calculated stride of a man reclaiming his territory. He had changed subtly in the presence of his brother and the other soldiers, his posture straighter, his voice deeper, as if he were trying to project an authority that didn't come naturally to him in this context. "You should have called first," Derek said, not bothering to hide his irritation. "I have a very busy schedule. Important clients depend on me." James raised an eyebrow, and Camila caught the brief look of surprise that crossed his face. "Sorry about that, brother. We just finished a long deployment and wanted to see family. Didn't realize we needed an appointment." The gentle rebuke hung in the air, and Derek's face flushed slightly. Camila recognized the signs of his building anger, the way his hands clenched and unclenched at his sides, the tight set of his jaw when he felt his authority was being questioned. "Of course you don't need an appointment," Derek said, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I'm just surprised, that's all. Camila should have called me at work to let me know we had guests." All three soldiers turned to look at Camila, who felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment. She should have called Derek, but the thought honestly hadn't occurred to her. She had been so shocked by the unexpected visitors and so focused on being a good hostess that she had forgotten about Derek's rule that all social interactions had to be pre-approved by him. "That's my fault," James said quickly. "I told her not to bother you at work. We figured we'd just wait until you got home." Derek's smile became even more strained. "Well, you're here now. Can I get you gentlemen something stronger than coffee? I have some excellent whiskey in my office." "Coffee's fine for us," Sergeant Johnson said. "We don't drink during the day." "Of course not," Derek said, though something in his tone suggested he found their discipline unreasonable. "Professional soldiers. Always on duty." Camila excused herself to refresh the coffee pot, grateful for an excuse to leave the room. In the kitchen, she could hear the conversation continuing, Derek's voice growing louder and more animated as he tried to impress his brother with stories of his legal victories and business success. "Closed a deal last week that netted the firm over $2 million, Derek was saying. "The client specifically requested me because of my reputation for getting results." "That's great, Derek," James replied, but Camila could hear the forced enthusiasm in his voice. "You always were ambitious." "Ambitious and smart enough to recognize opportunities," Derek continued. "Not everyone has what it takes to succeed in the corporate world. It requires a certain kind of discipline and focus that most people just don't possess." When Camila returned with fresh coffee, she found Derek in full performance mode, gesturing expansively as he described his latest case. The three soldiers were listening politely, but she could see the subtle signs of their discomfort. The way Corporal Washington's eyes kept drifting to her face, as if he were trying to get a better look at something. The way Sergeant Johnson leaned back slightly in his chair, creating distance. The way James's expression had grown more guarded as Derek talked. And of course, Derek was saying, having the right support system at home makes all the difference. Camila keeps everything running perfectly so I can focus on my career. Don't you, sweetheart? The endearment sounded false and patronizing, and Camila felt all four men's attention focus on her. I try to help however I can, she said quietly. She's very good at taking care of the house, Derek continued, his tone suggesting he was praising a particularly well-trained pet. Keeps everything organized, meals on time, never complains about the long hours I have to work. A man needs a wife who understands priorities. James's expression had grown distinctly cooler. I'm sure marriage is about partnership and mutual support, he said carefully. Derek laughed, a sound with no warmth in it. That's a nice ideal, James, but the reality is that someone has to lead and someone has to follow. In successful relationships, the roles are clearly defined. Camila understands that my career comes first because it provides for both of us. What did you do before you got married, Camila? Corporal Washington asked, ignoring Derek's lecture entirely and directing his question straight to her. Derek answered before she could open her mouth. She had a little marketing job at some local company. Nothing serious. She's much better suited to domestic life anyway. I was head of marketing coordination at Patterson and Associates, Camila said quietly, surprising herself with her boldness. I managed campaigns for several major clients. The three soldiers looked at her with new interest and Derek's face darkened. It wasn't really a management position, he said quickly. More of an assistant role. Camila tends to exaggerate her responsibilities. The silence that followed was heavy with tension. James looked back and forth between his brother and sister-in-law, and Camila could see understanding beginning to dawn in his eyes. Sergeant Johnson and Corporal Washington had both straightened in their chairs, their military training apparently alerting them to conflict even in civilian settings. Well, James said finally, I'd love to hear more about your marketing experience, Camila. That sounds like challenging work. It was, Camila said, her voice gaining strength. I really enjoyed the creative aspects and the client relationships. We worked with everyone from small local businesses to national corporations. Fascinating, Derek said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. But I think our guests are probably more interested in hearing about current events, not ancient history. Camila, why don't you start thinking about lunch? I'm sure these men are hungry after their long drive. It was a clear dismissal, Derek's way of removing her from a conversation he couldn't control. But instead of immediately jumping up to obey as she usually would, Camila found herself looking at James, who was watching the interaction with sharp, intelligent eyes. Actually, James said, I'd like to hear more about what both of you are doing now. Derek, you mentioned working long hours. That must be hard on your marriage. Derek's laugh was harsh. Marriage requires sacrifice, James. Camila understands that my success benefits both of us. Not everyone is cut out for the corporate world, but everyone can contribute in their own way. And what ways do you contribute to the partnership, Derek? Sergeant Johnson asked, his voice deceptively casual. The question hung in the air like a challenge. Derek's face grew red, and Camila recognized the warning signs of an explosion building. When Derek felt cornered or questioned, especially by people he considered his equals or superiors, his anger became unpredictable and dangerous. I provide everything, Derek said, his voice rising. This house, the cars, the lifestyle, the financial security. I work 60 hours a week to make sure we have everything we need. And Camila provides emotional support, household management, social coordination, James said quietly. Sounds like she works pretty hard too. It's not the same thing, Derek snapped. Anyone can clean a house or cook a meal. Not everyone can handle the pressure and responsibility of my job. The dismissive comment about Camila's contributions was too much for the three soldiers, who had clearly been raised with different values about respect and partnership. Camila could see the change in their faces, the way their expressions hardened as they began to understand exactly what kind of man Derek had become. Actually, Corporal Washington said, his voice carefully controlled, maintaining a home and supporting a partner's career is skilled work that deserves respect. Derek's face twisted with anger, and for a moment, Camila thought he might actually lose his temper in front of his brother and friends. Instead, he took a deep breath and forced another fake smile. Of course, he said. I didn't mean to imply otherwise. Camila knows how much I appreciate everything she does. But the damage was done. The three soldiers had heard enough to understand the dynamic in this house, and their opinion of Derek was written clearly on their faces. The visit that Derek had probably hoped would impress his military brother with his success and sophistication had instead revealed the ugly truth about who he had become. And Camila, for the first time in 2 years, didn't feel completely alone. The tension in the living room was thick enough to cut with a knife. Derek had excused himself to use the bathroom, leaving Camila alone with the three soldiers, and she could feel their eyes on her as she nervously straightened already perfect cushions and rearranged magazines that didn't need arranging. "Camila," James said gently, waiting until she looked up at him. "Can I ask you something?" She nodded, though her heart was racing. Derek would be back any minute, and if he caught her having a private conversation with his brother, there would be consequences later. "How did you get that bruise on your face?" The question was asked so quietly, so matter-of-factly, that for a moment Camila didn't understand what he had said. Then the blood drained from her face as she realized her makeup hadn't been as effective as she had hoped. "I don't know what you mean," she said automatically, her hand flying up to touch her cheek. "Ma'am," Sergeant Johnson said, leaning forward slightly, "we've all had training in recognizing signs of domestic violence. That's a fresh bruise, and the pattern suggests it was made by someone's hand." Camila felt trapped, cornered between her fear of Derek and these three men who were looking at her with concern and growing anger. "I fell," she said, the lie sounding weak even to her own ears. "Yesterday morning. I slipped in the bathroom and hit my face on the counter." The three men exchanged looks that clearly communicated their disbelief. Corporal Washington shook his head slowly, his expression sad but unsurprised. "We've heard a lot of excuses over the years," he said quietly. "Falls, accidents, clumsiness. But we know what a handprint looks like when we see one." "Please," Camila whispered, glancing toward the hallway where Derek had disappeared. "Don't say anything to him. It will only make things worse." The admission hung in the air like a confession. She had essentially confirmed their suspicions without meaning to, revealing that there were indeed things that could be made worse, that Derek was capable of behavior that would require intervention. James's face had gone very still, the kind of controlled calm that military personnel developed when dealing with dangerous situations. "How long has this been going on?" "It's not what you think," Camila said desperately. "Derek works very hard. He's under a lot of stress. Sometimes he just gets frustrated and I don't always handle things the right way." "There is no right way to handle someone hitting you," Sergeant Johnson said firmly. "There is no excuse, no reason, no justification for a man to put his hands on his wife in anger." The sound of Derek's footsteps in the hallway made Camila panic. "Please," she begged quietly. "Don't say anything. I can handle this. It's not as bad as it looks." But it was too late. Derek appeared in the doorway and immediately sensed the changed atmosphere in the room. His eyes darted between his brother and Camila, noting her obvious distress and the soldiers' grim expressions. "What's going on here?" he asked, his voice sharp with suspicion. "We were just getting to know your wife better," James said, his tone carefully neutral. "She was telling us about her marketing background." Derek's eyes narrowed as he studied the scene. Camila knew he was trying to figure out what had been said in his absence, whether his carefully constructed facade had been damaged by something she had revealed. "Camila can be quite the storyteller," Derek said, moving to stand behind her chair in what appeared to be an affectionate gesture but felt more like a claim of ownership. His hand settled on her shoulder, and she flinched involuntarily at his touch. The flinch was noticed by all three soldiers, who were trained to observe human behavior under stress. James's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, and Corporal Washington's hands clenched into fists before he forced them to relax. "Derek," James said, his voice. "Retry. Sissy. Continue. Edit. Taking on a harder edge. Can we talk privately for a minute? Maybe in your office." Derek's hand tightened on Camila's shoulder, his fingers digging in just hard enough to send a message. "Anything you want to say to me you can say in front of my wife. We don't keep secrets from each other." The irony of the statement was lost on Derek but not on anyone else in the room. James stood up slowly, his military bearing making him appear larger and more imposing than he had seemed while sitting down. "Actually, brother, I think this conversation needs to happen between men. Sergeant Johnson, Corporal Washington, would you mind keeping Camila company while Derek and I have a quick chat?" It wasn't really a request. There was something in James's tone that suggested military command, the voice of someone accustomed to giving orders and having them followed. Derek hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with being separated from Camila when he couldn't control what she might say, but unable to refuse without seeming weak in front of the other soldiers. "Fine," Derek said, removing his hand from Camila's shoulder. "But make it quick. I have calls to return." As the two brothers left for Derek's office, Sergeant Johnson moved to sit closer to Camila, while Corporal Washington positioned himself where he could see both the hallway and the front door. Their movements were subtle but strategic, the unconscious positioning of people trained in security and protection. "Ma'am," Sergeant Johnson said quietly. "Whatever happens in the next few minutes, I want you to know that you're safe right now. We're not going to let anyone hurt you." From Derek's office came the sound of raised voices, though the words were muffled by the closed door. Camilla could hear Derek's voice rising in anger and James's deeper tones responding with what sounded like controlled fury. "He's going to be so angry with me," Camilla whispered, wrapping her arms around herself. "You don't understand. When people interfere, when he thinks I've been talking about our private business, he gets..." "He gets what?" Corporal Washington asked gently. "Worse," she finished, her voice barely audible. The voices from the office grew louder, and suddenly there was a crash as if something heavy had been thrown against the wall. Sergeant Johnson was on his feet immediately, moving toward the hallway, but Corporal Washington stopped him with a gesture. "Let James handle it," he said quietly. "He knows what he's doing." In the office, James's voice could be heard clearly now, no longer muffled by distance or diplomacy. "You're going to sit down, shut up, and listen to what I have to say, Derek. And if you ever raise your hand to another human being again, especially your wife, you're going to have to answer to me. How dare you come into my house and threaten me?" Derek's voice was shrill with rage. "This is none of your business. What happens between me and my wife is private." "Nothing is private when it involves violence," James shot back. "Do you think I'm stupid? Do you think I can't see what you've done to her? She flinches when you touch her, Derek. She's terrified of you. She respects me," Derek screamed. "Something you obviously never learned. I provide for her, I take care of her, I give her everything she needs. You've isolated her, controlled her, and beaten her into submission." James's voice was ice cold now. "That's not marriage, Derek. That's imprisonment." The office door slammed open and Derek stormed out, his face purple with rage. Behind him, James followed more slowly, his expression grim but controlled. Derek looked at Camilla with such fury that she instinctively shrank back in her chair. "What did you tell them?" he demanded, advancing toward her. "What lies did you spread about me while I was gone?" Sergeant Johnson stepped between Derek and Camilla so smoothly it seemed choreographed. "Step back," he said quietly, but there was steel in his voice. "Get out of my way," Derek snarled. "This is my house and that's my wife and I'll speak to her however I want." "No," Corporal Washington said, rising from his chair. "You won't." For the first time since she had known him, Camilla saw Derek face opposition he couldn't intimidate or manipulate. These three men had been trained to handle dangerous situations, had faced real combat, real threats. Derek's bluster and rage meant nothing to them. "You need to calm down," James said, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to command. "You need to sit down and you need to think very carefully about what happens next." "Are you threatening me in my own home?" Derek's voice was rising toward hysteria. "I'll call the police. I'll have you all arrested." "For what?" Sergeant Johnson asked calmly. "Visiting family? Having a conversation? We haven't touched you, Derek. We haven't threatened you. We've simply made it clear that we won't stand by and watch you abuse your wife." The word, abuse, hit Derek like a physical blow. "I don't abuse anyone. I've never abused anyone." "Camilla, tell them. Tell them what our marriage is really like." All eyes turned to Camilla, who sat frozen in her chair, trapped between her terror of Derek's future retaliation and the hope she saw in these three men's faces. For 2 years she had dreamed of someone, anyone, seeing through Derek's facade and offering her help. Now that moment had arrived, and she was paralyzed by the fear of what would happen when these soldiers left and she was alone with Derek again. She started, then stopped, her voice failing her. "It's okay," James said gently, kneeling down beside her chair so he was at her eye level. "You don't have to say anything right now, but I need you to know that you have options. You have choices. And you have people who will help you make those choices if you want them to." Derek's face contorted with rage at seeing his brother comforting his wife, at witnessing his carefully maintained control slipping away in front of witnesses he couldn't silence or intimidate. "Get out," he said, his voice shaking with fury. "All of you. Get out of my house right now." "We'll leave," James said, standing up slowly. "But we'll be back. And Camilla, if you need anything at all, you call this number." He pressed a business card into her palm. "Day or night. We won't abandon you." As the three soldiers gathered their things and headed for the door, Derek stood rigid with rage, watching his world crumble around him. For the first time in years, someone had challenged his authority, questioned his behavior, and offered his wife an alternative to the prison he had built around her. The door closed behind them with a soft click, leaving Camilla alone with Derek and the terrible silence that followed the storm. She clutched James's business card in her trembling hand, knowing that everything had just changed for better or worse. Derek turned to look at her, and in his eyes, she saw a fury that promised consequences she had never imagined. The silence that followed the soldier's departure was more terrifying than Derek's loudest screaming fit. He stood motionless in the center of the living room, his chest rising and falling with controlled breaths, his eyes fixed on Camila with an intensity that made her feel like prey being studied by a predator. She remained frozen in her chair, James's business card clutched so tightly in her palm that the edges were cutting into her skin. The small piece of cardstock felt like both a lifeline and a death sentence, tangible proof of her betrayal in Derek's eyes. "Stand up," Derek said finally, his voice unnaturally calm. Camila's legs trembled as she rose from the chair, her movements slow and careful. She had learned to read Derek's moods like a survival manual, and this eerie calm was more dangerous than his explosive anger. When he yelled and screamed, his rage burned hot and fast. This cold fury could last for days. "Show me what he gave you," Derek said, extending his hand. For a moment, Camila considered lying, pretending she didn't know what he meant. But Derek had been watching her every move for the past 2 years. He knew her tells, her habits, her fears. There was no point in pretending. With shaking fingers, she opened her palm and revealed the business card. Derek plucked it from her hand and studied it, his jaw working as he read James's contact information. "Staff Sergeant James Hamilton," he read aloud, his voice dripping with mockery. "How heroic. How noble. My little brother, riding to the rescue like some kind of white knight." He looked up at Camila, and she saw something in his eyes that made her blood run cold. It wasn't just anger anymore. It was calculation, the look of someone planning something terrible. "Did you tell him about our private moments?" Derek asked, stepping closer. "Did you share intimate details of our marriage with strangers?" "No," Camila whispered. "I didn't say anything. They noticed." "They noticed what, exactly?" Camila's hand flew automatically to her cheek, and Derek's smile was sharp and predatory. "Ah yes, your clumsiness. Your tendency to walk into doors and fall downstairs. Such an unfortunate habit." The sarcasm in his voice made it clear that he knew exactly what his brother and friends had suspected, and he didn't care. If anything, he seemed almost proud that his control over her was so obvious. "I think," Derek said, beginning to pace around her in a slow circle, "that you've forgotten something very important about our relationship. You've forgotten who you are and who I am." Camila kept her eyes fixed on the floor, trying to make herself as small and invisible as possible. This was the Derek she feared most, the one who spoke in quiet, reasonable tones while planning her punishment. "You are nothing without me," he continued, his voice hypnotically soft. "You have no money of your own, no job, no friends, no family who cares enough to check on you. You are completely dependent on my generosity, my protection, my love." Each word was designed to cut, to reinforce the mental prison he had built around her brick by brick over the past 2 years. "And I," Derek said, stopping directly in front of her, "am the only person in this world who truly understands you. I know your weaknesses, your flaws, your tendency towards selfishness and ingratitude. I know that without guidance, without structure, you would destroy yourself." He reached out and lifted her chin, forcing her to look at him. His touch was gentle, almost loving, which made it more terrifying than if he had grabbed her roughly. "Those men who were just here? They don't know you. They don't understand the complexities of our relationship. They see a few bruises and think they understand everything, but they have no idea what you're really like when no one else is around." Camila wanted to argue, wanted to defend herself, but the words wouldn't come. 2 years of systematic psychological abuse had worn down her ability to fight back, to assert her own reality against Derek's twisted version of events. "They think they're helping you," Derek continued, his thumb stroking her cheek with mock tenderness. "But what they're really doing is filling your head with dangerous ideas. Ideas about independence and self-worth that you're not equipped to handle." He released her chin and began pacing again, his energy building as he worked himself into a philosophical frenzy about the nature of their relationship. "Marriage is about hierarchy, Camila. It's about someone being strong enough to lead and someone being wise enough to follow. I tried to explain this to you gently, with patience and understanding. But you keep testing me, keep pushing boundaries, keep making me be the bad guy." The victim blaming was so familiar that Camila almost found herself nodding along. This was Derek's greatest talent, his ability to twist reality until she questioned her own perceptions and memories. "Today's little performance was the final test," Derek said, stopping in front of her again. "And you failed. You sat there and let strangers form opinions about our private life. You allowed them to disrespect me in my own home. You chose their temporary sympathy over loyalty to your husband. Camilla's throat felt like it was closing up. She knew what was coming, could feel Derek building toward something that would be worse than anything that had come before. I'm disappointed in you, Derek said, shaking his head sadly. After everything I've done for you, all the patience I've shown, all the second chances I've given you, this is how you repay me. He walked to the window and looked out at the street, where the neighbors were going about their normal suburban lives, completely unaware of the psychological torture happening just a few houses away. I think, Derek said slowly, that you need some time to think about what kind of wife you want to be. What kind of person you want to be. Whether you want to be part of this family or whether you want to throw away everything we've built together. The threat was clear even though it was wrapped in the language of choice and consequence. Derek was planning something, some form of punishment that would be designed to break her spirit completely. Go to our bedroom, he said, not turning around from the window. I'll be up in a few minutes to discuss your behavior and what needs to change going forward. Camilla's legs felt like water as she climbed the stairs to their bedroom. Behind her, she could hear Derek moving around the living room, probably cleaning up any evidence of the afternoon's confrontation, erasing any trace that his brother and friends had been there. In the bedroom, she sat on the edge of the bed and stared at her reflection in the dresser mirror. The woman looking back at her was a stranger, hollow-eyed and broken, nothing like the confident person she had been just 3 years ago. From downstairs came the sound of Derek's voice on the phone, probably calling his office to cancel his afternoon appointments. When Derek decided to discuss her behavior, it usually took hours, sometimes stretching late into the night as he methodically dismantled her self-worth and rebuilt it in the shape he preferred. But this time felt different. This time there had been witnesses to his mask slipping. This time, someone had offered her help, had seen through his facade and recognized the truth of what her life had become. James's business card was gone, confiscated by Derek, but the memory of his kind eyes and his promise remained. We won't abandon you, he had said, and something in his voice had convinced her that he meant it. For the first time in 2 years, Camilla allowed herself to imagine a different future, a life where she didn't have to measure every word and action against Derek's unpredictable moods. It was a dangerous thought, one that could get her into even more trouble if Derek sensed it, but she couldn't push it away. Change was coming whether Derek liked it or not. The question was whether she would be strong enough to survive it. Derek's footsteps on the stairs were deliberate and slow, each step designed to build anticipation and fear. Camilla had been sitting on their bed for 20 minutes, her mind racing through possible scenarios, each one worse than the last. When he finally appeared in the doorway, he was carrying a glass of his expensive whiskey and wearing the cold smile that meant he had been planning her punishment in detail. I've been thinking about our conversation downstairs, Derek said, settling into the armchair by the window like a judge preparing to deliver a sentence. And I've realized that I've been too permissive with you. Too understanding. Too willing to make excuses for your behavior. Camilla remained silent, having learned long ago that anything she said during these sessions would be twisted and used against her. Today's incident with my brother proves that you can't be trusted with normal social interactions, Derek continued, taking a slow sip of his whiskey. You clearly don't understand appropriate boundaries or how to represent our marriage in a positive light. He set his glass down on the side table and looked at her with the expression of someone solving a complex problem. So I've decided that we need to implement some new rules. Some structure that will help you learn self-discipline and proper behavior. The word rules sent a chill through Camilla's body. Derek's previous rules had gradually isolated her from the outside world, stripped away her independence, and turned her into a prisoner in her own home. She couldn't imagine what new restrictions he was planning. First, Derek said, counting on his fingers, no more unsupervised contact with visitors. If someone comes to the door, you get me immediately. You don't invite them in, you don't have conversations, you don't make decisions about hospitality without my approval. Camilla nodded automatically, though the rule was pointless since they never had visitors anyway. Second, I think your free time is part of the problem. Idle hands and all that. So I'm going to give you more structure to your days. I'll prepare a schedule of tasks and activities that will keep you busy and focused on productive things. The idea of having every minute of her day planned and controlled by Derek made Camilla feel like she was suffocating, but she kept her expression neutral. Third, Derek continued, his voice growing more excited as he outlined his plans, I think we need to address your tendency toward selfishness and ingratitude. So every evening before dinner, you're going to write down 3 things you're grateful for about our marriage and 3 ways you can improve as a wife. The psychological manipulation was so blatant that even in her weakened state, Camila could see it for what it was. Derek was trying to force her to gaslight herself, to convince herself that her abuse was actually evidence of his love and care. And finally, Derek said, standing up and beginning to pace, "I think some of your problems stem from too much exposure to outside influences. Television, books, the internet, they all fill your head with unrealistic expectations and feminist nonsense about independence and equality." Camila's heart sank as she realized what was coming. "So for the next month, you'll have no access to any media or entertainment. No TV, no computer, no books except the ones I approve. You need to clear your head of outside influences and focus on what really matters, being the best wife you can be." The punishment was designed to complete her isolation, to cut off her last connections to the outside world and leave her completely dependent on Derek for information, entertainment, and human contact. It was psychological torture disguised as marriage improvement. "Do you understand these new rules?" Derek asked, stopping in front of her. "Yes," Camila whispered, her voice barely audible. "Good. We'll start implementing them tomorrow morning. I think you'll find that structure and discipline will help you feel more settled and content." Derek retrieved his whiskey glass and headed for the door, then paused and looked back at her. "Oh, and Camila? If my brother or his friends try to contact you, you're to tell me immediately. I don't want you to have any private conversations with them, understand? They don't have your best interests at heart." After Derek left, Camila remained sitting on the bed, staring at the wall and trying to process what had just happened. The new rules weren't just restrictions, they were a systematic plan to break her spirit completely, to eliminate any possibility of outside support or rescue. But something had changed in her during the afternoon's confrontation. Seeing Derek's mask slip in front of his brother, watching him lose control when faced with real opposition, had shown her that he wasn't as powerful as he wanted her to believe. He was terrified of losing control over her, which meant that control wasn't as absolute as she had thought. 3 hours later, when Derek was in his office drinking and playing online poker, Camila made a decision that terrified and exhilarated her in equal measure. She crept downstairs and used the landline phone in the kitchen to call information. "I need the number for Fort Bragg," she whispered to the operator. "Military Personnel Directory." Her hands shook as she dialed the number and asked to be connected to Staff Sergeant James Hamilton. It took several transfers and long minutes of waiting, but finally she heard his familiar voice on the line. "James, it's Camila," she said, speaking as quietly as possible while keeping one ear tuned for any sound from Derek's office. "I need help. Are you safe right now?" James asked immediately, his voice sharp with concern. "For now. But Derek he's implementing new rules. I think he's planning to isolate me completely. I'm scared of what he might do." "Listen to me carefully," James said, his military training kicking in as he shifted into operational mode. "We're going to get you out of there, but we need to be smart about it. Do you have somewhere you can go? Family, friends, anyone Derek doesn't know about?" Camila thought desperately. Derek had systematically eliminated all her close relationships, but there might be one person he had overlooked. "My sister Rachel," she said. "She lives in North Carolina. Derek made me cut contact with her, but I don't think he knows her address." "Perfect. Here's what we're going to do." For the next 10 minutes, James outlined a plan that sounded like something from a military operation. They would wait until Derek left for work the next morning, then James and his friends would arrive to help her pack essential belongings and evidence of Derek's abuse. They would drive her to the bus station, where she could travel to her sister's house while they stayed behind to deal with Derek if he came home early. "What about legally?" Camila asked. "He'll try to find me. He'll say I stole his car or his money or something." "We're documenting everything," James assured her. "Photos of your injuries, recordings of our conversations, witness statements. When this goes to court, Derek won't be able to claim you're the problem." The plan was risky and complicated, but it offered something Camila hadn't had in 2 years: hope. Real, concrete hope for escape and freedom. "Can you hold on until tomorrow morning?" James asked. "Can you get through one more night?" Camila looked toward Derek's office, where she could hear him laughing at something on his computer, completely confident in his control over her and their situation. "Yes," she said, surprising herself with the strength in her voice. "I can hold on." "Good. We'll be there at 8:30 tomorrow morning, exactly 30 minutes after Derek leaves for work. Be ready." After hanging up the phone, Camila crept back upstairs and lay in bed, staring at the ceiling and planning her escape. For the first time in 2 years, she fell asleep without being afraid of what tomorrow might bring. Tomorrow everything would change. Tomorrow she would reclaim her life. Camila woke before Derek's alarm, her body vibrating with nervous energy and the strange sensation of hope she had almost forgotten existed. She lay still in the darkness, listening to Derek's steady breathing beside her, and tried to memorize every detail of the plan James had outlined. At exactly 6 a.m., Derek's alarm began its shrill beeping. He rolled out of bed with his usual morning grumbling, stumbled to the bathroom, and began his rigid routine of shower, shave, and coffee. Camila had timed this routine hundreds of times over the past 2 years. Derek was as predictable as clockwork, which would work in her favor today. She forced herself to go through her own normal morning routine, preparing Derek's breakfast and coffee with the same careful attention she always paid to his preferences. The normalcy felt surreal, like she was acting in a play about her own life. "I have back-to-back meetings all morning," Derek said as he ate his eggs, not looking up from his phone. "Don't expect me home for lunch. And remember what we discussed yesterday about your new schedule. I expect you to start implementing the rules immediately." "Of course," Camila said quietly, refilling his coffee cup with steady hands that betrayed none of her inner turmoil. Derek left the house at exactly 8 a.m., the same time he left every morning, completely unaware that his carefully controlled world was about to implode. Camila watched his BMW disappear down the street, then ran upstairs and began the most important packing job of her life. She had thought carefully about what to take. Important documents first. Her birth certificate, social security card, passport, and marriage certificate were hidden in a jewelry box Derek never bothered to open. Then clothes, but only basics that could fit in one suitcase. Everything else could be replaced, but her freedom couldn't. The most crucial items were the evidence. Photos she had secretly taken of bruises over the past year, hidden in a folder behind other pictures on her old camera. Medical records from the 2 times Derek's violence had been severe enough to require treatment, though she had lied to the doctors about the cause of her injuries. The notebook where she had started documenting Derek's threats and violent episodes, though she had been too scared to write down the worst incidents. At exactly 8:30, she heard the rumble of the military trucks in her driveway. Through the window she could see James, Sergeant Johnson, and Corporal Washington climbing out, moving with the efficient purpose of people executing a well-planned operation. Camila opened the door before they could knock, her suitcase in one hand and a bag containing the evidence in the other. "Are you ready?" James asked, his eyes scanning her face for any signs of new injuries. "I'm ready," she said, and meant it completely. The next 30 minutes passed in a blur of controlled activity. While Camila finished packing, the 3 soldiers systematically documented everything they could find that might be relevant to her case. Sergeant Johnson photographed the house, paying special attention to the expensive items Derek had used to establish his financial control. Corporal Washington took pictures of Camila's remaining bruises and helped her write a detailed statement about the pattern of abuse. James focused on gathering financial documents and evidence of Derek's control tactics. "We need to establish a paper trail," he explained as he photographed Derek's home office. "Bank statements, credit card bills, anything that shows how he controlled your access to money." The evidence was overwhelming. Derek's computer, which he had left unlocked in his arrogance, contained emails to her former employer claiming she was having a nervous breakdown and shouldn't be contacted. There were credit reports he had pulled without her knowledge, tracking her financial activity. Most damning of all, there was a folder of research about managing difficult wives and maintaining authority in marriage. "This is enough to establish a pattern of psychological abuse," James said grimly as he photographed the computer screen. "No court is going to believe this was a normal marriage." By 9:15 they were ready to leave. Camila took one last look around the house that had been her prison for 2 years, trying to feel some sense of nostalgia or loss. Instead, all she felt was relief and a growing sense of excitement about the future. The drive to the bus station took 20 minutes, during which James explained what would happen next. "You'll stay with your sister until the legal proceedings are finished," he said. "We've already contacted a lawyer who specializes in domestic violence cases. She'll handle the divorce paperwork and make sure Derek can't use the legal system to harass you." "What about Derek?" Camila asked. "What happens when he gets home and finds me gone?" "We'll be there," Corporal Washington said from the driver's seat. "We're going to have a conversation with him about appropriate behavior and legal consequences. Make sure he understands that any attempt to contact you or your family will result in criminal charges." At the bus station, James handed Camila an envelope containing enough cash for her ticket and expenses for the next few weeks. "This is from all of us," he said. "Consider it an investment in your future." As Camila boarded the bus that would take her to her sister's house and her new life, she felt something she hadn't experienced in 2 years: pride in herself. She had found the courage to ask for help, to accept help, and to take the terrifying step of leaving everything familiar behind in pursuit of something better. The bus pulled away from the station, carrying her toward an uncertain but hopeful future. Through the window, she could see James and his friends waiting to make sure she departed safely, 3 guardian angels who had appeared in her life at exactly the right moment. For the first time in 2 years, Camila smiled a real smile, not the careful, measured expression she had learned to wear around Derek, but a genuine expression of joy and anticipation. She was free, truly free, and the whole world was waiting for her to rediscover who she could become. 6 hours later, she was in her sister's arms, crying tears of relief and gratitude as Rachel held her and whispered, "I never stopped hoping you'd come home." 6 months later, Camila stood in front of the bathroom mirror in Rachel's guest bedroom, applying makeup not to hide bruises but simply because she wanted to look nice for her job interview. The face looking back at her was still her own, but it was a face transformed by freedom, proper nutrition, and the slow healing that came from safety and love. The physical changes were obvious. She had gained back the 20 pounds Derek's stress and control had stripped from her frame. Her hair, no longer subjected to the tight, severe styles Derek preferred, fell in natural waves around her shoulders. But the most dramatic change was in her eyes. The constant vigilance and fear had been replaced by something that looked remarkably like hope. "You're going to be amazing," Rachel called from the kitchen, where she was making coffee before heading to her job at the regional medical center. "Patterson and Associates would be crazy not to hire you back." The irony wasn't lost on Camila that she was interviewing for a position at her former company. The job Derek had convinced her was meaningless and beneath her abilities. Her former supervisor, Janet, had been shocked to receive her call 3 weeks ago, explaining that she was ready to return to work and asking if there might be any opportunities available. "We never found anyone who could match your client management skills," Janet had told her during their preliminary phone conversation. "Several of our major accounts have been asking when you might come back." The knowledge that she had been valued and missed gave Camila a confidence she hadn't felt in years. Derek's constant criticism and belittling had convinced her that she was incompetent and unemployable, but the reality was that she had been good at her job, very good, and people remembered that. Living with Rachel had been a gradual process of rediscovering herself. The first month had been the hardest, filled with panic attacks when the phone rang, nightmares about Derek finding her, and a constant state of hypervigilance that made normal activities feel impossible. But Rachel, with her medical training and infinite patience, had helped Camila understand that her reactions were normal responses to trauma, not signs of weakness or instability. "Healing isn't linear," Rachel had explained during one of Camila's darker moments. "Some days you'll feel strong and confident, other days you'll feel like you're back at square one. That's normal. What matters is that you're safe now and you're choosing to heal." The legal proceedings had moved more quickly than anyone expected. Derek's initial rage at discovering Camila's escape had led him to make several crucial mistakes. He had called Rachel's house repeatedly, making threats and demands that were recorded and turned over to the police. He had showed up at Rachel's workplace, causing a scene that resulted in a restraining order. Most damaging of all, he had hired a private investigator to track Camila down, not realizing that such behavior would be seen as stalking by the courts. James and his friends had been true to their word, documenting everything and providing testimony that painted a clear picture of Derek's abusive behavior. The divorce had been finalized just last month, with Camila receiving a settlement that would allow her to rebuild her life on her own terms. "Derek tried to claim you were mentally unstable," the lawyer had explained. "But we had medical records, photographs, witness testimony, and his own emails proving a pattern of psychological abuse." The judge wasn't sympathetic to his arguments. Now, as Camila prepared for her interview, she reflected on how much her relationship with fear had changed. She was still nervous about returning to work, still worried about whether she could perform at the level she once had, but these were normal anxieties, not the paralyzing terror that had ruled her life with Derek. The interview went better than she had dared to hope. Janet and the other managers welcomed her back like a returning family member, and the accounts she had once managed were eager to work with her again. They offered her a position as senior marketing coordinator, with a salary higher than what she had earned when she left. "We learned how valuable you were when we tried to replace you," Janet said with a smile. "Consider this our way of making sure you don't leave again." That afternoon, Camila called James to share the good news. He had been her anchor throughout the past 6 months, checking in regularly and providing both practical support and emotional encouragement. "I'm proud of you," he said, and she could hear the genuine warmth in his voice. "It takes incredible strength to rebuild your life the way you have." "I couldn't have done it without you and your friends," Camila replied. "You saved my life." "No," James said firmly. "You saved your own life. We just helped you remember that you had the power to do it." As evening approached, Camila sat on Rachel's back porch, watching the sunset and thinking about the future. For the first time in years, she could make plans that extended beyond just surviving each day. She could think about finding her own apartment, about rebuilding friendships, about perhaps someday trusting someone enough to consider a romantic relationship built on respect and equality rather than control and fear. Her phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number, and for a moment her old anxiety spiked. But the message was from Sarah, her former colleague, who had somehow gotten her number from Janet. "Heard you're coming back. Can't wait to catch up over drinks and hear about everything. Friday night? My treat." The invitation to normal social interaction, to friendship and laughter and the simple pleasure of being around people who liked her for who she was, brought tears to Camila's eyes. These were good tears, tears of gratitude and anticipation rather than fear and despair. She texted back immediately, "I'd love that. See you Friday." As the sun set behind the trees, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that Derek would never again have the power to prevent her from enjoying, Camila felt something she had thought was lost forever. Excitement about tomorrow. Not just relief that she had survived today, but genuine enthusiasm for what the future might hold. She was no longer Derek's victim. She was Camila, a strong, intelligent, capable woman who had survived something terrible and emerged with her spirit intact. And that was something worth celebrating. 1 year after her escape, Camila sat in the front row of a courthouse in her best professional suit, watching as Derek was led to the defendant's table in handcuffs. The man who had once controlled every aspect of her life now looked smaller somehow, diminished by the orange jumpsuit and the weight of the charges against him. The criminal trial had taken months to prepare, but the prosecution had built an overwhelming case. Derek faced charges of domestic violence, stalking, harassment. Retry. CC. Continue. Edit. And violation of the restraining order. The evidence James and his friends had gathered, combined with Camila's detailed testimony and the testimonies of multiple witnesses, painted a clear picture of systematic abuse. The defendant's behavior represents a textbook case of domestic abuse, the prosecutor had explained during opening statements. He isolated the victim from her support system, controlled her finances, and used physical and psychological violence to maintain dominance over her. This is not a case of marital discord, this is a case of criminal behavior. Camila had dreaded testifying, but when her moment came, she found strength she didn't know she possessed. Standing at the witness stand, looking directly at Derek for the first time since her escape, she felt no fear. The man who had once seemed so powerful, so capable of destroying her, was just a bitter, controlling person who had built his sense of worth on making someone else feel worthless. "He told me I was nothing without him," she testified, her voice clear and steady. "He convinced me that no one else would ever want me, that I was lucky he was willing to put up with my flaws. But I realize now that he was describing himself. He was nothing without someone to control and diminish." Derek's lawyer had tried to paint Camila as vindictive and unstable, claiming she had fabricated the abuse allegations to gain advantage in the divorce proceedings. But the evidence was too overwhelming, the pattern too clear, the witnesses too credible. James testified about what he had observed during his visit, describing Derek's obvious need to dominate and control the conversation, and Camila's visible fear and physical injuries. Sergeant Johnson and Corporal Washington corroborated his testimony, adding their professional observations about the dynamics they had witnessed. "In our military training, we learned to recognize signs of abuse and domestic violence," Sergeant Johnson testified. "What we saw in that house was a classic case of an abuser using intimidation and psychological manipulation to control his victim." The most damaging testimony came from Derek's former colleagues, who reluctantly admitted under oath that Derek had often made disturbing comments about his marriage and his wife. His secretary testified that she had heard him on the phone with Camila, speaking to her with a level of disrespect and cruelty that had made her uncomfortable. "He would call her stupid, worthless, incompetent," she testified. "He talked about her like she was his property rather than his wife. It made everyone in the office uncomfortable, but he was a partner, so no one felt they could say anything." Derek's own behavior during the trial worked against him. When he took the stand in his own defense, his arrogance and lack of remorse were obvious to everyone in the courtroom. He refused to take responsibility for any of his actions, instead blaming Camila for provoking him and claiming that his behavior was normal for any man dealing with a difficult wife. I provided for her, gave her everything she needed, Derek testified, his voice rising with indignation. She lived in a beautiful house, never had to work, never had to worry about money. And this is how she repays me, by making up lies and destroying my reputation. The prosecutor's cross-examination was devastating. Mr. Hamilton, when you say you gave your wife everything she needed, did that include the right to have friends? She could have friends if she chose appropriate ones. Did it include the right to work outside the home? She didn't need to work. I provided everything. Did it include the right to speak to her own family? Her family was toxic and interfering. Did it include the right to express disagreement with your decisions? Derek's pause was telling. Marriage requires someone to lead and someone to follow. And did it include the right to be safe from physical violence in her own home? I never seriously hurt her. Sometimes people argue, sometimes voices are raised, sometimes dash. Mr. Hamilton, are you saying it's acceptable for a husband to hit his wife? The question hung in the air like a trap, and Derek walked right into it. I'm saying that what happens between a husband and wife is private, and outsiders don't understand the full context. The courtroom was silent as Derek essentially admitted that he believed he had the right to use violence against his wife. Even his own lawyer looked horrified. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. When they returned, the foreman stood and read the verdict with clear conviction, guilty on all counts. Derek's face went white as the judge announced his sentence. 3 years in prison, followed by 5 years of probation during which he would be prohibited from contacting Camila or any member of her family. He was also ordered to attend anger management and domestic violence counseling, and to pay restitution for Camila's medical expenses and counseling costs. As Derek was led away in handcuffs, he turned to look at Camila one last time. But instead of the fear and submission he was used to seeing in her eyes, he saw something that must have shaken him to his core: pity. She felt sorry for him, for the empty, broken person he had become, but she was no longer afraid of him. Outside the courthouse, James and his friends were waiting with Rachel and several of Camila's co-workers who had come to support her. The group celebrated quietly, understanding that while justice had been served, this had been a difficult and painful process for everyone involved. How do you feel? Rachel asked as they walked toward their cars. Camila considered the question carefully. Free, she said finally. Completely, finally free. 6 months later, Camila moved into her own apartment, a bright one-bedroom place with large windows and no memories of fear or violence. She had been promoted again at work and was managing some of the company's most important accounts. She had reconnected with old friends and made new ones, building a social life based on mutual respect and genuine affection. She had also started volunteering at a local domestic violence shelter, sharing her story with other women who were struggling to escape abusive relationships. Her experience with Derek, as terrible as it had been, had given her unique insights into the psychology of abuse and the process of healing that helped her connect with other survivors. The hardest part, she would tell the women she counseled, is believing you deserve better. The abuse convinces you that you're worthless, that no one else would want you, that you're lucky someone is willing to put up with you. But those are lies. You are valuable, you are worthy of love and respect, and you have the strength to build a better life. One evening, as she sat in her apartment reading a book she had chosen simply because it interested her, Camila's phone rang. The caller ID showed James's number, and she answered with a smile. "How's civilian life treating you?" she asked. James and his friends had recently completed their military service and were transitioning to civilian careers. "Can't complain," James replied. "I actually called because I wanted to tell you something. Derek was denied parole last week. He won't be eligible to apply again for another year." Camila absorbed this information with surprising calm. A year ago, news about Derek would have sent her into a panic. Now, it was simply information about someone who was no longer part of her life. "How do you feel about that?" James asked. "Relieved for any woman who might have encountered him if he'd been released," Camila said honestly. "But mostly, I don't feel anything about Derek anymore. He's just someone I used to know, someone who taught me important lessons about strength and resilience, though I'm sure that wasn't his intention." After hanging up, Camila returned to her book, a mystery novel about a detective who specialized in solving cold cases. It was exactly the kind of book Derek would have dismissed as frivolous and worthless, which made reading it feel like a small but significant act of rebellion. As she turned the pages in her bright, peaceful apartment, surrounded by plants she had chosen and furniture that reflected her own taste, Camila reflected on the journey that had brought her here. The abuse had been real, the fear had been overwhelming, and the process of healing had been harder than anything she had ever done. But she had survived. More than that, she had thrived. She had reclaimed her life, her identity, and her future. She had learned that she was stronger than she ever imagined, braver than she ever believed, and worthy of the love and respect she had thought were lost forever. Derek had tried to destroy her, but instead, he had inadvertently shown her just how unbreakable she really was. And for that, in a strange way, she was almost grateful. The woman who had once cowered in fear at the sound of footsteps was gone. In her place was someone who knew her own worth, who would never again allow someone to diminish her light, who understood that true strength came not from controlling others but from choosing to build rather than destroy. Camila smiled as she turned another page, secure in the knowledge that whatever challenges the future might bring, she would face them with courage, wisdom, and the unshakable conviction that she deserved nothing less than a life filled with respect, dignity, and joy. Justice had been served, but more importantly, she had served justice to herself by refusing to remain a victim and choosing instead to become a survivor, a thriver, and ultimately, a victor in the battle for her own life.